Chapter 369. Everyone looked at it at the same time, with a hint of schadenfreude in their eyes. They had no hope, and naturally hoped that more unlucky people would suffer. Whoosh! The whirlpool disappeared, and a figure appeared. Then a momentum belonging to Jean-Dan realm broke out. Everyone's face suddenly changed, and the gloating expression immediately turned into deep awe and envy. He broke through. This person broke through Jean-Dan realm. He's really lucky. No wonder he came out in advance. Exploration is not suitable for him. The most important thing is to consolidate his cultivation. Jean-Dan realm is already at the level of Mount Head in a small sect. Once he breaks through, he will reach the sky in a single bound. High position and power. What else does he need to take risks? I'm so envious. When can I break through? Fan Zisong restrained his momentum, which was temporarily out of control because of the transmission. He looked back at the calm whirlpool of the secret realm. Although there was joy in his eyes, there was also a touch of bitterness. From the beginning to the end, I didn't even know her name. 3 days later, in the crypt of the giant tree, the white lake had shrunk by 1/5, and the spirituality had also disappeared by 1/5. Suli sat in the middle of the lake, clenched her fists, and felt the turbulent spiritual power in her body. Her eyes were bright. The peak of the 12th hurdle of Lianqi realm, here I am. In just 3 days, her spiritual power broke through to the peak of the 12th hurdle under the infusion of the place of Nimbus, like riding a rocket, without any hindrance. One more step forward, and it would be the first time to go on the Chuangxing path. The level of Lianqi realm in ancient times consumed much more Nimbus than I expected. Every time I broke through a level, the Nimbus needed had to be re-estimated. Suli breathed a sigh of relief, and there was a touch of relief in her eyes. If she really went to the place of Nimbus in her memory, she might not even reach the 12th hurdle of Lianqi realm. Suli's eyes sparkled as she cupped a handful of lake water. The water of Nimbus is thicker as it goes down, and its color is almost milky white. Although 1/5 of it was absorbed by me, it actually didn't consume much. Black Lotus. Black Lotus ring appeared on her ring finger. As it rotated slowly, Black Lotus's exclamation came, the best place of Nimbus. Little Suli, the spiritual power in your body has been raised to the limit. Is it? Chuangxing path. Suli's eyes flashed with decisiveness. If she really went to the outside world to explore the star path, she didn't know how long it would take her to finish the 12th hurdle to the 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm. Black Lotus Ring was silent for a moment and said, "Have you really decided?" He had made it very clear to Suli that the Chuangxing path was extremely difficult, especially for a genius like Suli. The difficulty of the Chuangxing path was several levels higher. If she rushed, she was likely to die. I don't have so much time to wait. Suli took a deep breath. She wanted to know the truth about the reincarnation mirror. Also, she wanted to know whether those two people lived well. I won't stop you. Be careful. Black Lotus's voice became serious and less carefree. Remember what I said. The hardest thing to pass on the star path is the mental trial. If you get lost in it, no one can save you. Suli responded and took a deep breath to calm her mind. Then she condensed a touch of spiritual power on her fingertips and slowly sketched in the nothingness. Soon, the outline of a portal was sketched out by Suli. As the complex imprints were integrated into it, the portal gradually became solid from illusion. When Suli drew the last stroke, the entire space of the secret realm of shattered spirits shook, as if something had woken up. However, this change was obviously not perceived by practitioners in Juji realm who were exploring in the secret realm. Even Beishao Liang only felt a slight chill on his back, and soon he couldn't feel anything. At the same time, in the crypt, a portal emitting a faint starlight appeared, as if it was real. Sully stood up with a dignified look and looked at the constantly twisting starry sky in the portal. She could vaguely see a path like a stone path extending from the door's ill to the end. The gate of the star path. Black Lotus made a complicated sigh and soon fell silent. Now he couldn't destroy Sully's concentration. The ancient cultivation school, Sully's eyes flashed without fear. She stepped into it and disappeared. The wonderful touch passed through her whole body. The scene in front of Sully changed, and her sight was immediately occupied by the bright and gorgeous starry sky. She couldn't help but feel amazed. It feels so real. Is it possible that, somewhere in the world, someone can really leave the mainland and enter the starry sky? It's not the time to think about this. Sully quickly gathered her thoughts and gently stepped on the first white stone step. In an instant, her face changed slightly, and her light body immediately carried a heavy pressure. What a terrible pressure! If I hadn't been refined by the starlight guided by the reincarnation mirror in addition to the secret records of Black Lotus, I would have been pressed to the ground at the first step. Nowadays, practitioners in the cultivation circle, even those in Jindan realm, would be directly pressed into meat sauce. Sully tightened her mind. At the 12th hurdle of Lianqi realm, she was more powerful than those in Jindan realm in her previous life. But she still felt pressure at the first pass of Chuangxing path, which showed how difficult it was. It's more than a month. I don't have much time. If I wait until the secret realm of shattered spirits is completely closed, I don't know what will happen. There was no turning back. After Sully reluctantly adapted to it, she quickly stepped into the second step. Suddenly, her face changed slightly, and she withdrew her step that was about to touch the second step. This is the refinement of starlight. Sully's face flashed with a hint of surprise. The constant numbness coming from under her feet was very similar to the scene when the reincarnation mirror refined her, but the power coming from under her feet was much stronger than that of the reincarnation mirror. Glancing at the Black Lotus ring and the reincarnation mirror that had completely lost contact, Sully was silent. She knew that it was definitely not the doing of the reincarnation mirror. Is this the gift of Chuangxing path? Sully frowned. Black Lotus said that the gift of Chuangxing path could only appear from the 5th step. Why did it appear on my first step? Without figuring out the reason, Sully didn't dwell on it anymore. She directly sat down and tried to guide the power of refinement to travel all over her body. The gift of Chuangxing path appeared on the first step. It was very likely that her Chuangxing path was more dangerous than the one Black Lotus saw. Only by getting the greatest improvement on each step could she have a little confidence. As for time, she couldn't care about it now. If she was trapped in the secret realm of shattered spirits for 100 years, she would accept it. After a long time, Sully, who was sitting on the first stone step, finally opened her eyes. With a decisive look, she took the second step. Boom! Completely different from the first stone step, the second stone step emitted an extremely huge repulsive force, which almost directly lifted Sully away. Sully snorted coldly, clenched her teeth and increased her strength. Her right foot hanging in the air finally fell slowly and touched the stone step. At the moment when it touched the stone step, all the repulsive force disappeared immediately. Sully then put her other foot on the stone step, and there was no other abnormality. She immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Past the second step. Sully murmured to herself. Her face was slightly pale, and there was a strong lingering fear in her eyes. If she didn't find the gift of the first stone step and directly stepped on the second step, she would definitely be directly blown off the stone step and lost in the endless starry sky. With the experience, Sully was not anxious this time, and directly sat down with her legs crossed. As expected, it didn't take long for a gentle force to come from the next stone step, constantly nourishing Su Li's awareness sea. The power of her soul was rapidly improved at a speed visible to the naked eye. The second stone step actually works on the soul. Su Li couldn't hide the surprise in her eyes. In the cultivation circle, the power of the soul was inborn. There was no way to improve it unless one reached the Huashan realm. The power of the soul was related to the power of understanding. The stronger a person's power of the soul was, the easier it was to deduce. The same secret method in front of people with different power of the soul would definitely be comprehended first by the person with stronger power of the soul, regardless of cultivation. After absorbing this gift, won't my innate talent become even stronger? Then the difficulty of the next step of Chuangxing path. Su Li pursed her lips tightly, and her face was full of caution. She concentrated on refining the power of the soul. After an inestimable time, Su Li finally got up again and stepped on the third step without hesitation. But nothing happened this time. Su Li was surprised for a moment, and the picture in front of her suddenly distorted. The starry sky disappeared, and was replaced by a mountain pavilion like a fairyland. Holy girl Su, have you decided? Since you don't want to open the reincarnation mirror, I will give you a second way. As long as you are willing to leave with me and betray Yushu sect, you can save all the people in Yushu sect, including your master. Outside the pavilion stood a large number of practitioners in black robes with unfathomable numinous. The leading old man looked cold and arrogant, and his tone was calm, as if he was sure of victory. Su Li glanced at the white gauze she wore, and then at the complete reincarnation mirror that she put on the table. Her expression was extremely indifferent. Is this the test of mind that Black Lotus mentioned? She didn't lose her mind at all. A long time ago, such a group of people did come to Yushu sect and asked her to make a choice. Maybe for her, this might be a difficult choice, but now, reincarnation mirror, humph. She grasped the reincarnation mirror with her palm and exerted force. Crack! The whole illusion was broken together with the reincarnation mirror, and the picture was restored to the stairs of Chuangxing path. The third step is not difficult for me at all. Su Li pondered and said nothing. Was it because of her state of mind, or because it was easier to distinguish the true from the false when her soul was strong? She suppressed an idea in her mind. She would ask Black Lotus when she went out, and maybe she would get the answer. Sitting cross-legged, Su Li waited quietly. If nothing unexpected happened, there would also be a gift of Chuangxing path this time. Sure enough, after a while, the feeling of numbness came again. The gift of the third stone step was the same as the first step, which was the refinement of star power. After a long time, Su Li sat on the 26th stone step and was silent. Chapter 370. Under the gloomy and lonely starry sky, time seemed to have no meaning. Su Li frowned tightly, and a touch of irritation flashed through her eyes. She had been stuck here for too long. Every minute and every second became extremely long for her. Besides the dangers of the first 3 tests, the following 23 tests seemed to her like a fortuitous encounter that was delivered to her, and all of them were within her acceptable range. The 27th level was obviously a difficult one. Black Lotus clearly said that the first Chuangxing path has 18 levels at most, in line with the extreme number of 9. But I have reached the 26th step. Why doesn't it end? In the extreme number of 9, the 27th step is likely to be the last step. But why does it end when I reach the 26th step? She had too many questions in her mind, but no one could answer them for her. After several tests, she had confirmed that there was indeed no point of strength in the space in front of her. How could she solve the problem? Looking at the distant dim stars that seemed to be within reach, the boundless darkness almost completely swallowed up the stone steps. Under such a despairing vision, even a cultivator with a strong state of mind would definitely go crazy if he stayed for a long time. Taking a deep breath, Suli forced herself to calm down and suppress the feeling of irritation in her heart. At this time, she couldn't lose her mind. Otherwise, she was likely to be completely lost in this starry sky, as Black Lotus said. What's wrong? Suli thought carefully. Starting from the first stone step, 3 steps formed a cycle, testing the physical body, strength, and state of mind respectively. Perhaps there were some tests of wisdom path, but she passed all of them without any danger. After repeating this for 8 times, her physical body and divine soul were almost enhanced to a certain limit. From the 25th step onwards, the gifts of the star path completely overflowed, and she couldn't improve at all. This shouldn't be the case. If Chuangxing path only had such a monotonous test, it was not enough to become the most terrible cultivation school in the ancient cultivation era. She must have overlooked something. After pondering for a moment, Suli suddenly narrowed her eyes and couldn't help but have a terrible idea. Yes, a monotonous cycle. If she couldn't end Chuangxing path, it proved that she was in some kind of danger at the moment. What kind of trap would keep repeating? The answer was self-evident. Thinking of this, Suli's eyes showed decisiveness. She turned around and stepped into the darkness without hesitation. Just after she took this step, the surrounding darkness immediately broke like a glass plate, revealing the original starry sky of Chuangxing path. Double illusion, Suli took a deep breath and looked at herself still on the 3rd stone step. There was a deep fear in her eyes. Sure enough, passing through the 26 steps was just a facade. If she couldn't maintain her composure and figure this out, the consequences would be unimaginable. The difficulty of the 3rd stone step is much higher than the 2nd one. It's laughable that I was so proud of myself when I broke through the first layer. Suli laughed at herself in her heart, and her eyes became clear again. No matter how much time she wasted, she finally passed the test. This gift from the star path. The mysterious and warm pneuma from the stone steps under her feet melted into her body and disappeared. Suli only felt that the pneuma was of great benefit to her, but she couldn't tell what the benefit was. The mysterious star path. My realm and knowledge are too low. Suli sighed in her heart and sat down to absorb quietly. However, not long after, the warm aura did not appear again. Logically speaking, since the 3rd stone step was so difficult, the duration of the gift should be longer than before. But Suli estimated that only less than 1/10 of the time of the 2nd stone step had passed. The warm pneuma should be very precious. With this thought flashing in her mind, Suli was about to get up. Suddenly, she saw the nothingness in front of her vibrate. After a few breaths, a mysterious ancient text appeared from the nothingness. Although she had never seen such characters, she understood the meaning at a glance. Breaking through the realm, the 3rd person in all times. Suli was shocked. Did the star path have its own consciousness? Otherwise, how could such a word appear? 1,200 breaths? Did it refer to the time when she passed the 3rd level? What did the 3rd person in all times mean? She didn't think that her talent could rank 3rd in a long time. Black Lotus, Suli was silent. This time, she felt that even Black Lotus might not be able to explain the strange phenomenon in front of her. Whoosh! At this moment, the ancient text flashed for a moment, and the original words disappeared. Another picture similar to a list emerged. There were only 2 lines of words on it, and the rest was blank. Suli looked carefully, and the meaning of the 2 lines of ancient text emerged in her mind. Star Lord of Nemo, Duan Hongchen. Star Lord of Kueyu, Lin Chen. Star Lord of Kueyu. Kueyu Palace. Suli's expression changed suddenly. Even with her state of mind of 2 lives, she couldn't help but feel shocked at this moment. She still remembered that Black Lotus once said that the holy method she practiced was stolen from Kuei-yu Palace. Could it be that Star Lord of Kuei-yu, who ranked second, was the owner of Kuei-yu Palace? She also knew that Duan Hongqin, who ranked first, was a more terrifying existence than the owner of Kuei-yu Palace. The realm of these ancient existences was beyond her imagination. She fell into a deep silence. The legendary people and things suddenly appeared in front of her, which made her feel extremely unreal. Suddenly, Suli sensed that a trace of Numa left her body and integrated into the list. This change suddenly made her look change. Could it be? Boom. A faint vibration came from the depths of the nothingness, and then the picture of the list rippled slightly. Sure enough, in the third line, words began to appear. Qingshui Circle, Su Li. Su Li stared at the dazzling list in the nothingness. It really appeared. Compared with the two people in front of her, her existence was so small. Now, in this Chuangxing path, she could even appear on the same list. This feeling was indescribably wonderful. Su Li's heart was full of complex feelings. Suddenly, an extremely light laughter echoed in the starry sky and reached her ears in a flash. There is someone here. Su Li's pupils shrank, and her whole body tightened. She looked around and spread out her psychic awareness, but found no other existence. While searching hard without any results, the laughter sounded again. Interesting. The arrangement left many years ago was finally triggered by someone, and it seems that I have some fate with you. Junior, practice hard. Maybe we will meet again in the future. She couldn't tell whether the mysterious voice was male or female, and it came and went quickly. After leaving this sentence, the laughter gradually faded away and soon disappeared. Su Li stared blankly at a gold-faced booklet that suddenly appeared on the steps. Was it given to her by the owner of the voice? She stretched out her hand, and the booklet fell into her hand and opened. The first line of the familiar general principles came into her eyes. It was Secret Records of Black Lotus, but it was not. She knew at a glance that this method was much more profound than Secret Records of Black Lotus. In other words, Secret Records of Black Lotus was just a simplified version of this method. She closed the booklet, and 3 marks of ancient characters flashed on the surface. Sueyu Tactics. It turns out that the original name of Secret Records of Black Lotus is Sueyu Tactics. If Black Lotus knows that the holy method he stole is a castrated version, I don't know how he will react. Su Li shook her head and laughed, but her eyes were extremely bright. She vaguely guessed the origin of the owner of the voice, but this guess was too shocking. She only dared to think about it in her heart, and would not even mention it to Black Lotus. Is that kind of existence still living somewhere in the world? Putting away the booklet, Su Li calmed down when the nothingness list disappeared, and found that her spirit, Qi, and spirit were a little different. However, no matter who it was, after experiencing so many strange things in a short time, his state of mind would certainly be transformed, and his vision would be greatly broadened to a certain extent. If it were in the previous life, Su Li would be shocked for a long time even if an old ancestor of Huashan realm appeared in front of her. But now, even a practitioner of nature's test realm could not really shake her heart. After a slight fluctuation, a mysterious gate emitting starlight appeared in front of Su Li, the gate of the star path. Are there only 3 passes on my star path? Su Li's eyes were slightly gloomy, and she stepped out without hesitation. Her star path must have some kind of change, and ordinary rules naturally could not bind it. Although she lost 6 gifts of the star path, she did not feel it a pity. A single Sueyu Tactics was definitely more precious than the total of the gifts of the first star path. Under the crypt, there was a sudden wave in the calm converging Nimbus Lake, and then the gate appeared. Su Li walked out of it. Taking a deep breath of pure Nimbus, Su Li showed a long-lost relaxed expression on her face. I finally came out. Then, boom. Her momentum soared, and she naturally broke through to the 13th hurdle of Lianchi realm without any action. The surrounding water gathered and rushed into Su Li's body to replenish the empty pubic region. Little Su Li, you really made it. Black Lotus Ring appeared, and his surprised voice shook Su Li's awareness. See, tell me the details. You are an evildoer, and the star path must be extremely difficult. Is the 18th pass a test of mind? Su Li smiled, and didn't feel irritated listening to Black Lotus's chattering voice. Instead, she felt a little familiar. Shortly after she recovered her memory, she even threatened to kill herself in order to get rid of Black Lotus. Now, only a few years had passed, and all kinds of changes really made people sigh. Without answering Black Lotus, Su Li stretched out her hand, and immediately a time-measuring magic treasure flew out of the lake. The scale on it had risen to the 10th zone. Only 10 days have passed. Su Li was slightly shocked. Why did she feel that she had stayed in the star path for more than 100 days? Are you dumbfounded? How can you know the magic of the star path? It's normal for the time flow to be different. In the ancient cultivation years, as long as the practitioners with some talent will encounter this situation. Our ghost clan once had a peerless talent with the body of evil ghost who reached 8 times the time flow. How about it? Isn't it awesome? Chapter 371. Black Lotus was really an old guy who had been silent for many years. He talked too much. Su Li rubbed her eyebrows with a headache. Why didn't she know that Black Lotus was a chatterbox before? She forced him to appear before. Now, even if she didn't force him, he would definitely talk to her when he recovered a little. Do you want me to explain to you until the end of the secret realm of shattered spirits? She said helplessly. Black Lotus suddenly paused, and then said with a lack of confidence, I am tired. The secret realm of shattered spirits will close in a month. You practice hard. The ring on her ring finger disappeared. Su Li shook her head and smiled. She sat in the pool and slowly closed her eyes. She slightly stimulated her pubic region, and the whole lake immediately set off turbulent waves, wrapping her in the spiritual water. Her momentum immediately rose at a speed visible to the naked eye. Black Lotus, who was hiding in a corner of Su Li's body, couldn't help but sigh at Su Li's good luck. There was no bottleneck in Lianchi realm. After reaching the 12th hurdle of Lianchi realm, one could reach Zhuji realm at any time if he wanted to. He didn't tell Su Li that almost 80% of the practitioners who took the Chuangxing path in ancient times broke through as soon as they reached the 12th hurdle of Lianchi realm. Because, from the 12th hurdle, one needed to accumulate too much spiritual power. From the 13th to the 14th hurdle, the spiritual power needed was more than the sum of the previous 12 hurdles. He once met a stubborn ghost practitioner, who was obviously the favored one. When he reached the 12th hurdle of Lianchi realm, he was younger than anyone in the clan. He believed that he was the chosen one, and determined to accumulate to the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm before breaking through to Zhuji realm. Relying on the rewards from the clan and his own luck, he spent a full 600 years, but he only managed to reach the 16th level of Qi disciple. His clansmen of the same generation had already reached the peak of foundation establishment. Compared to the golden cultivation period that he had lost, the consolidation of his foundation was really insignificant. Looking at Su Li, she came to the secret realm of shattered spirits and directly encountered a convergent place of nimbus that had been accumulated for many years. Such conditions were much better than the treatment of inherited disciples in ancient times, and directly saved 500 or 600 years of practice time. A 14-year-old who reached the 12th hurdle of Lianchi realm. I'm afraid that no one has ever seen such a genius except me, right? Black Lotus clicked his tongue in wonder. His mentality had changed greatly compared to a few months ago. After all, he used to be the holy treasure of the clan, high and mighty, worshipped by the entire clan. Su Li used extreme means to force him to show up. Although he recognized the reality and never held a grudge, he always felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. But now that he saw Su Li's potential, the discomfort immediately disappeared. He used to think that it was a fantasy to return to the peak by relying on Su Li, but now he saw a little hope. Unknowingly, half a month had passed. The convergent place of Nimbus in the crypt had completely dried up, leaving only a palm-sized piece of white. Su Li absorbed the last spiritual power into her body and stood up. The pneuma that was condensed to the limit stagnated for a moment, and then suddenly burst out. Boom! An incomparably powerful force filled the crypt, and cracks immediately appeared on the hard earth and rocks. The entire crypt began to shake violently. The crypt is collapsing. Su Li opened her eyes, and a dazzling light flashed in her eyes. With a move of her mind, a transparent shield was set up around her body to block all the flying stones. Su Li sensed the spiritual power condense like mercury in her pubic region and meridians, and a touch of disappointment flashed in her eyes. The peak of the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm, almost reaching the 18th hurdle. Unfortunately, with such a large convergent place of Nimbus, she thought she could directly reach the 18th hurdle. Unexpectedly, she underestimated the level of ancient cultivation. This was a complete convergent place of Nimbus, but she still couldn't reach the realm of Lianqi realm after absorbing it all. It was too exaggerated. Seeing that the crypt was about to collapse, Su Li was about to fly away. Suddenly, she noticed that there seemed to be something in the palm-sized dazzling white puddle. Su Li tried to reach out and touched a hard object. She immediately grabbed it and opened her palm. It turned out to be a broken copper coin with a very strange appearance. It was triangular in shape, and the edge was covered with complex lines. It didn't look like an object of Jojo region. She looked at it for a moment and gently stroked the surface of the copper coin with her fingertips. Suddenly, she felt a row of small and neat bumps. Are there words on it? Su Li was interested. Before she had time to take a closer look, suddenly there was a loud bang. A large piece of earth and stones fell from the top, completely covering the dry lake. Forget it. Let's go out first. Su Li could only temporarily put the copper coin into the universe ring. But as soon as the copper coin approached the universe ring, it was bounced off by a force. Can't be put into the universe ring. It's a treasure. Su Li was shocked. She immediately put away her previous casual thoughts and carefully hid the copper coin. Then, she blasted away the rocks in front of her and returned to the ground through the tree root passage. Standing firmly on the ground, Su Li waved her hand and a hurricane swept over. The broken tree root was completely flattened, and no clue could be seen. Next, I'll find a secluded place to study the copper coin and wait for the end of the secret realm of shattered spirits. Su Li's eyes flickered. In the following time, it was no longer displayed that she wanted to go to the original convergent place of Nimbus. It was better to study the origin of the copper coin. Su Li flew out of the dense forest. Not long after she headed for Jituyuan, she suddenly frowned and stopped to look at two people who were approaching from a distance. One of them was Yulin, who had a grudge against her. Bitch! Yulin's eyes flashed with excitement and resentment. She stopped in front of Su Li with a cold smile, as expected of a lone cultivator with the zodiac of a rat. Even my tracking goo can't find your traces when you hide. I was about to give up, but you just had to run into me. I can only say, you are fated to die. Junior sister apprentice, is she the female rogue practitioner who hurt and humiliated you? The handsome and tall young man beside Yulin glanced at Su Li. When he saw her skinny and unattractive figure, a touch of boredom flashed in his eyes. He said gently with a hint of concern, "Let me help you vent your anger. Step aside and don't get hurt." Hearing what the senior fellow apprentice said, Yulin was moved. She stood aside obediently and turned her head to stare at Su Li's face. She gnashed her teeth and said, "This demon girl is very powerful. Senior fellow apprentice, be careful and don't hold back. Even if you kill her, no one will trace it to you. Junior sister apprentice, don't worry." Brother Wei, the handsome senior fellow apprentice, nodded solemnly. But he was interrupted by Su Li with a faint smile. "You are echoing each other. Are you from Pear Garden? Are you going to perform on the stage?" The handsome senior fellow apprentice's face immediately became gloomy. He became angry out of shame. "You are courting death." Swish! A flying sword shuttled between the handsome senior fellow apprentice's fingers like lightning and shot at Su Li with all its strength. Su Li squinted her eyes slightly and didn't dodge. In the eyes of Yulin and the handsome senior fellow apprentice, she seemed to be scared silly. Yulin stared at Su Li without blinking. It seemed that she could see Su Li's tragic situation in the next second. She laughed proudly. "Useless. Who gave you the courage to humiliate a disciple of a big sect? You can't even take one sword from my senior fellow apprentice. Go to hell." Ding! Before she finished speaking, a crisp sound of flying swords colliding suddenly came from the field. The handsome young man saw a cold face suddenly appeared in front of Su Li. He couldn't help but change his expression. He stopped and stepped back. He said in surprise, "Bei Xiaoliang. It's you." A person's name was like a tree's shadow. Yulin's expression also changed dramatically. She nervously retreated to the handsome young man. "Senior fellow apprentice, is he Bei Xiaoliang?" Seeing the handsome young man nodding slightly with a dignified expression, Yulin's face immediately became extremely ugly. Why does this person protect that bitch? Bei Xiaoliang hooked his fingers, and the flying sword automatically flew back to his hand. He bowed his head and stroked the shining sword body. He said lightly, "Do all the disciples of Zihan sect bully people like this to bully an unarmed and weak girl?" "Ha ha ha, senior fellow apprentice, you are right. Zihan sect is full of sneaky and narrow-minded people. Senior fellow apprentice, don't let them go." Su Li followed the voice and saw Qi Qin, who carried an ancient sword on his back, walking over with a smile. Bei Xiaoliang frowned. "You are not a disciple of my sect for the time being. I will be soon." Qi Qin smiled cheekily. "Senior fellow apprentice, you have promised me. My talent is just a little worse than yours. I think the master will be very happy to see me." Bei Xiaoliang slightly twitched the corner of his mouth and did not speak. In the secret realm of shattered spirits, he met Qi Qin and thought this person was good, so he wanted to introduce him to the sect. He did not expect that Qi Qin looked cold, but in fact, he was extremely thick-skinned. "Bei Xiaoliang, don't go too far." The handsome young man looked at the two chatting as if there was no one else, and immediately felt insulted. He was so angry that his face turned red. He growled in a low voice, "How dare you slander my Zihan sect? Even the elders of your sect don't have the guts to do so. If you have the ability, don't run away. When the eldest senior fellow apprentice of my sect comes, I will definitely let you taste the consequences." "Oh." Bei Xiaoliang turned around with a cold smile. "Even Qin Xianghan doesn't dare to talk nonsense in front of me. You dare to speak like this in front of me? You have some guts. Come on. Don't let me look down on your Zihan sect." "You." The handsome young man immediately stiffened. Thinking of the senior fellow apprentices who had been seriously injured by Bei Xiaoliang, his back was wet. Suddenly, a burst of laughter came from not far away. "Bei Xiaoliang, why do you embarrass the juniors of my Zihan sect? How about I fight with you?" While speaking, a figure in blue appeared in the blink of an eye and stood between the two. Seeing the familiar feminine face in front of him, Bei Xiaoliang was shocked. He frowned and said in a low voice, "Qin Xianghan. Why are you here?" Qin Xianghan narrowed her eyes, and an undisguised killing intent flashed through her eyes. "I can come here, so I naturally have my ways. Bei Xiaoliang, you and I have never fought with each other. Why don't we fight here?" Chapter 372. Golden Core Stage. Bei Xiaoliang stared at Qin Xianghan and was silent in his heart. Could it be that he sensed Qin Xianghan's gaze before he entered the outside world? Although his strength was indeed as rumored, and he could escape unscathed from a gold core cultivator, but that was only an ordinary gold core cultivator. Qin Xianghan was the same as him. She was the little holy son of the Zihan sect, and her means were extraordinary. How could a gold core cultivator from the outside world compare to her? "Junior brother, you and this fellow Daoist should find a chance to leave. If you really can't, crush the jade tablet and leave. I have my own ways to deal with this." Qi Qin should have been happy to hear him call him junior brother, but now there was only deep worry in his heart. He could see that Bei Xiaoliang was just talking big to comfort them, but he was not sure. Qi Qin sighed in his heart and turned to look at Su Li. When he caught a glimpse of the latter's still cold and emotionless face, he surprisingly felt a trace of peace in his heart. Bei Xiaoliang didn't know how powerful this woman was, but he had seen it with his own eyes. Although Jindan realm was far beyond the scope of Zhuji realm, he still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Seeing that neither of them moved, Bei Xiaoliang was slightly annoyed. When he was about to transmit the sound again, Qin Xianghan's laughter suddenly sounded. "Ha ha ha, Bei Xiaoliang, you can't even protect yourself, but you still think about the safety of others." Qin Xianghan's smile was full of deep meaning. "I spent so much effort to come in. You really don't think I'm just here to meet you, do you?" As soon as these words came out, Bei Xiaoliang's face suddenly changed, and Qi Qin also understood the meaning. He took out the token and crushed it without saying a word. But after waiting for a long time, no vortex appeared. Qi Qin and Bei Xiaoliang's faces immediately became extremely gloomy. Qin Xianghan smiled even more when he saw this. He pointed at the air, and the flying sword was unsheathed with a bang, full of killing intent. "After today, there will be no Bei Xiaoliang in the cultivation world. I, Qin Xianghan, will not be anyone's stepping stone." Xiao! The flying sword flashed like an illusion, and its speed was extremely fast. It divided into 25 pieces and turned into residual shadows, stabbing at the vital parts of Bei Xiaoliang. Bei Xiaoliang dealt with him with all his strength and had no time to care about Qi Qin and Qi Yu. Yulin and the handsome young man jumped far away and looked at the sand and stones in the field calmly. Bei Xiaoliang would be defeated sooner or later. At that time, it would be easy to kill Qi Qin and Su Li. There was no need to rush now. Qi Qin also retreated to the side and looked around. The terrain here was too flat. If they could enter the dense forest, they might have a chance. "Your sword is not bad." Su Li's slightly indifferent voice suddenly came into his ears. Qi Qin was so shocked that his heart skipped a beat. He looked at the thin figure beside him in shock. When did she get here? He actually didn't notice it at all. Su Li looked at Bei Xiaoliang, who was exhausted in the field, and said, "There is a tactical matrix for camouflage and a trapping tactical matrix here. It's unrealistic for you to go to the dense forest to deal with them." "What?" Qi Chen's expression changed when he heard this. He didn't believe it and rushed into the dense forest. Sure enough, he hit a barrier halfway. He attacked with all his strength but couldn't hurt it at all. "What level is this tactical matrix?" Qi Chen was shocked. He had never seen it. Even the tactical matrix in the dangerous place of the ancient sword's secret treasure was absolutely not as advanced as the one Chen Xianghan set. Thinking of this, Qi Chen suddenly felt shocked. He quickly returned to Su Li and asked with a little expectation, "You can recognize the tactical matrix. Do you have a way to break it?" Su Li tilted her head and her eyes fell on the ancient sword behind Qi Chen. In Qi Chen's view, the meaning was self-evident. Taking advantage of others' difficulties. Qi Chen's face became more and more ugly. He didn't expect that this woman's temperament was so cold. At this time, she not only didn't help, but also wanted to take advantage of others' difficulties. Thinking of the sound transmitted by Bei Xiaoliang before, Qi Chen snorted coldly. Without saying anything, he took off the cloth bag on his back and threw it to Su Li. Su Li took the ancient sword and quickly opened it. Seeing the familiar and special lines on the ancient sword, she couldn't help but be slightly shocked. A cold light flashed in her eyes. Sure enough, it was Han Feng's sword. In the illusion of reincarnation, the cheap senior fellow apprentice Tan Taiyu once gave her a sword. Unexpectedly, after 1,000 years, this sword was not destroyed with the reincarnation mirror, but spread to Qingshuwei Circle. Is it possible that someone alive brought this sword out of the reincarnation mirror? If such a person was still alive, he must have a deep relationship with her. Su Li pondered for a moment and threw the ancient sword back to Qi Chen's arms. She said, "The origin of this sword is very special. You'd better recast it before using it, so as not to cause trouble." Qi Chen was stunned. After a while, he said, "You don't want it?" Su Li slightly hooked her lips and didn't answer. She said lightly, "If you can stimulate the power of this sword, Chen Xianghan will not be your opponent." Qi Chen's face darkened. If he could really use this sword, he would have gone to help. How could he stand here and worry? Since you can see the origin of this sword, you must be able to use it. He gritted his teeth and stuffed the Han Feng sword into Su Li's hands again. "Anyway, my senior fellow apprentice helped you just now. As long as you can help him out of danger, I will agree to any request you have." Su Li raised her eyebrows and threw the sword in her hand. Qi Chen felt a weight on his back, and the sword returned to the cloth bag. Then, he saw a very faint smile on the face of the woman who had been cold all the time in front of him. "That's what you said." Before she finished her words, Su Li's figure had disappeared. Qi Chen looked anxious. How could she be Chen Xianghan's opponent with bare hands without the ancient sword? But after a few breaths, the anxiety on Qi Chen's face was completely replaced by horror. He saw that Su Li suddenly flashed in front of Bei Xiaoliang, who was pale, and blasted an extremely simple punch. He didn't even feel how much power was in it. Chen Xianghan, who was still a few feet away from her, turned into a blood mist with a boom. He died just like that. Qi Chen took a breath and was so shocked that he almost broke his tongue. Bei Xiaoliang was also completely frozen. Looking at Su Li's back, he felt cold and even began to wonder if he was dreaming. How much power did it take to blast Chen Xianghan into a blood mist with one punch? If this woman turned around to deal with him, it would be a matter of one punch. Senior fellow apprentice Chen. The handsome young man looked at the blood mist floating in the sky, and his face was full of disbelief. His heart trembled violently. How could anyone kill senior fellow apprentice Chen in the secret realm of shattered spirits? It was definitely an illusion. Senior fellow apprentice, she is looking at us. Yulin's horrified voice sounded in his ears. The handsome young man quivered and immediately took out the jade token and crushed it. But after that, he suddenly realized something. This area has the means left by senior fellow apprentice Chen. We can't get out. The handsome young man's heart instantly sank. Su Li's face didn't change. She waved her palms from a distance. Bang! Bang! Two more clusters of blood mist spread. It's not killing, but chopping melons and vegetables. Chi Chen's scalp was numb, and he smiled bitterly in his heart at the same time. He thought that Su Li coveted his ancient sword before. Now it seemed that with the strength of this woman, she didn't need any external objects. She could crush a practitioner in Jindan realm with her strength alone. Even in a big sect like Yushu sect, she could be an elder of Naiman branch. Su Li naturally didn't know Chi Chen's thoughts. At this moment, she stretched out her hand and the storage rings of Qin Xianghan and the other two fell into her hand automatically. At the same time, Beishao Liang walked over with a slightly restrained expression. He bowed slightly and said respectfully, "Senior, thank you for saving my life. Don't call me senior. I'm younger than you." Su Li spoke bluntly and mercilessly. Beishao Liang was suddenly embarrassed, but he didn't care very much. She was more talented than him, so it was normal for her to have an eccentric temper. At this time, Chi Chin came over with a hollow laugh and said, "I'm really sorry. I misunderstood you just now. It doesn't matter. Don't forget your promise." After checking the things in the storage rings, Su Li was slightly satisfied and responded casually. Chi Chin couldn't help but feel anxious. What couldn't such a powerful female practitioner do? Why did she need his help? Su Li didn't say anything else, and he didn't dare to ask. Beishao Liang, who was sure that Su Li had an eccentric temper, didn't dare to interrupt at will. The scene suddenly became cold. Su Li didn't care about the weird atmosphere. She closed her eyes and sensed carefully. Then she stamped her feet, and immediately a wonderful wave came out with her as the center. Beishao Liang felt the wave and was confused. He couldn't understand what Su Li was doing. Chi Chin didn't feel anything. He was even more confused than Beishao Liang. Su Li waited patiently. Then, not long after, a small bulge suddenly appeared on the flat ground. Found it. Her eyes brightened, and she immediately flashed to the bulge and dug the soil. Beishao Liang followed and immediately saw a palm-sized quaint compass hidden inside. Matrix plate. Is this the tactical matrix for deception that Chi Chen mentioned? He recognized it and quickly associated it with Chi Chen's secretly transmitted sound before. He immediately guessed that this thing was obviously a rare treasure. But he didn't think about it, and he didn't dare to think about it. This mysterious female practitioner was not only powerful, but her means were also very strange and unpredictable. She was definitely a powerful character who couldn't be provoked. After Qin Xianghan's death, the compass was already ownerless. Su Li dripped a drop of blood on it and quickly integrated it into the compass. After completing the master recognition, she put it away and studied it carefully after going out. After doing this, Su Li looked up at Beishao Liang and Chi Chin and said lightly, "You two, follow me." Beishao Liang and Chi Chin looked at each other and saw a trace of a bitter smile in each other's eyes. Then they followed together. 4 days later, the three of them came to a valley with beautiful scenery. The concentration of spiritual power was several times higher than other areas of the secret realm of shattered spirits. Is there such a blessed place in the secret realm of shattered spirits? Beishao Liang was amazed. He had entered the secret realm of shattered spirits several times, but he had never been to this area. Thinking of the tactical matrix for deception, he suddenly had a guess in his heart. This area was likely to be hidden by the tactical matrix set by this woman, and no one under Jindan realm could find it. The valley was very small. It didn't take Su Li and the other two a moment to reach the end. Under the cover of dense trees, they could vaguely see some traces of building houses. Chapter 373. Su Li looked at the ruins of her former cabin, and a complex understanding rose in her heart. Perhaps only the Star Lord who appeared in the Chuangxing path could obtain the real eternity. It was still too early to think about this. Su Li shook her head to dispel the distracting thoughts. She waved her hand and swept away the traces of the cabin. Immediately, a wash-basin-sized white pool appeared. After 1,000 years of nourishment and recovery, this white pool seemed to be bigger than she remembered. However, for her who had reached the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm, it was not very useful. This is the convergent place of Nimbus. Bei Xiaoliang exclaimed and was shocked. The secret realm of shattered spirits was extremely famous in the Zhuzhou region because of the convergent place of Nimbus. There were tens of thousands of practitioners who entered the secret realm of shattered spirits, but only a few could really encounter the convergent place of Nimbus. The woman in front of him actually knew the existence of the convergent place of Nimbus and brought them here. Senior, in a daze, Bei Xiaoliang called him senior again. Su Li didn't correct him this time. She waved her hand and swept away the dust around. Then she took out 3 futons and threw them in front of the white pool. Sit down. Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin didn't dare to hesitate and sat down quickly. Su Li sat in front of them and was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Which branch of disciple are you?" Bei Xiaoliang was stunned for a moment. Qi Qin was a casual practitioner, so Su Li could only ask him. Without hesitation, he immediately bowed his head and said, "I am the first disciple of Elder Mo Qin of Yundan Mount, Bei Xiaoliang." Yundan Mount, Elder Mo Qin. Su Li's body shook slightly, and the calmness on her face completely froze. "Li, after I break through Jindan realm, I can also form my own sect on Yundan Mount. You will be the first disciple of Mo Qin. How about that? Li, leave quickly. Don't worry about me. Only when you leave Yushu sect, I can be at ease. Li, why do you? Remember, come back alive." "Master," Su Li murmured in her heart with mixed feelings. She closed her eyes, and the past flowed through her memory. After her rebirth, her state of mind had changed dramatically. She became selfish, scheming, and had no bottom line. She was no longer the naive holy girl Su who could sacrifice herself for the sect. However, no matter what she had become, as long as she thought of her teacher, Mo Qin, her heart would be soft. In her previous life, no matter how the world changed, that woman always stood on her side. After she recognized Mo Qin as the owner of Reincarnation Mirror, her first reaction was to let her leave Yushu sect, regardless of her own situation. After thousands of years, this memory did not fade away. Instead, it became firmer with the passage of time. In Su Li's heart, Mo Qin was not only her master but also a relative. After a long time, Su Li opened her eyes. Her eyes were still indifferent, but there was a trace of imperceptible softness in her eyes. "After my death, Master will be alone. She should accept a disciple as a companion. Bei Xiaoliang has a good temperament. After today, there is Qi Qin. Even without me around, she felt bitter in her heart. For the Master, she only had a deep guilt in her heart. Although she was reborn now, she knew that there were 3 people in Huashan realm in Yushu sect. The body of evil ghost was definitely a dangerous place. How could she dare to show up? This guilt would last for a long time. There are 7 days before the end of the secret realm of shattered spirits. Su Li's eyes were shining, and she suddenly said, "There is not much time. If you don't understand anything in your practice, you can ask me." She used to be the holy girl of Yushu sect. If she didn't want to accumulate enough foundation, she would have broken through to Yuaning realm. Now, with the special experience of Reincarnation Mirror, she was more than enough to guide 2 people in Zhuji realm. Bei Xiaoliang and Qi Qin were surprised. Su Li's sudden change in attitude caught them off guard. Seeing that they were silent, Su Li frowned. Bei Xiaoliang suddenly came to his sense and said slowly, "Senior, I practice Yushu tactics, but I can't practice it to the perfect realm. There is a flaw in it, so I dare not break through rashly. Master can't see the problem. For this reason, I have stayed in the peak of Zhuji realm for 300 years. Senior, do you have any way?" Bei Xiaoliang said helplessly. Although the master treated him very well, she was not good at fighting. She was an alchemist of Yundan Mount and didn't practice Yushu tactics to the perfect realm. He had no guidance and could only explore by himself. Naturally, he felt extremely difficult. Su Li pondered for a moment and said, "Show me the mental method and let me see." Bei Xiaoliang immediately ran the mental method to show the route, but he didn't have much hope for Su Li's answer. After all, Yushu tactics was a secret of Yushu sect. Even if he showed it without reservation, it was impossible to understand and improve his practice method in just 7 days. After a while, Bei Xiaoliang ran the complete Yushu tactics. When he was about to run it from the beginning for the second time, Su Li stopped him and said, "Okay, that's enough." Enough? Bei Xiaoliang was shocked. Before he asked, he saw Su Li began to draw in the nothingness. In the blink of an eye, she drew the complete running route of Yushu sect. Maybe you are used to it. When running these 3 meridians, there was a pause for half a breath. Su Li said slowly. After she practiced this mental method to the perfect realm, she had studied it for decades and even improved it. Of course, she was very familiar with it. Bei Xiaoliang was surprised and doubtful. He tried to run it and observed deliberately. As expected, he found a pause, and he couldn't help but be more shocked. She saw it only once, but she really saw the problem. Maybe he could really solve his troubles with this and solve the problem once and for all. Thinking of this, his eyes lit up. His absent-mindedness was swept away, and he listened attentively like a good student. Qichen also stared intently. He hadn't joined the sect yet, so he couldn't practice Yushu tactics. But now after listening to Su Li's explanation, it would be easier and more beneficial for him to practice in the future. What is the perfect realm? Su Li didn't care about the change of the two and continued, "The perfect realm is round and flawless. Every route of running Yushu tactics must be done without error, so that you can break through to the perfect realm, purify the genuine energy in your body, and make your foundation to a higher level." Bei Xiaoliang was completely immersed in Su Li's explanation and was fascinated. He had never seen anyone who could explain the Jade Void tactic so thoroughly. Even the Grand Supreme Elders who had preached on altars in the past could not do so. He had a good comprehension ability. Otherwise, he would not have been able to reach the level of the little saint by exploring alone. Now, with Su Li's unreserved teaching, his understanding of Yushu tactics suddenly improved like a rocket. One day later, Su Li sorted out the structure of Yushu tactics. She changed the topic and began to talk about her improved Yushu tactics. Now she had several top ancient pocket-sized holy methods in her hands, and she could make a lot of improvements to Yushu tactics. So, she told Bei Xiaoliang her ideas. The more Bei Xiaoliang listened, the more shocked he was. In the end, he directly took out the jade slip and nervously recorded what Su Li said, for fear of missing anything. 3 days later, Su Li made the last suggestion. The light in her eyes disappeared, and she said lightly, "The secret realm of shattered spirits will be closed in 3 days. Bei Xiaoliang, since you have memorized all I said, you don't have to rush to try. Why don't you take advantage of the convergent place of Nimbus to break through to Jindan realm? Many of the ideas I said can only be tried by people in Jindan realm. You should understand that sharpening the axe will not delay the work of cutting firewood." "Yes, senior." Bei Xiaoliang responded solemnly, and his expression was full of respect. The meaning of this respect was different from before. It was a kind of reverence for the elder, rather than fear. Suli helped him so much that she was like a second master to him. If he didn't already have a master, he would definitely beg Suli to accept him as a disciple. Even if Suli once said that she was younger than him, it was not an obstacle. In the cultivation circle, the more powerful ones were the masters. Chi-Chin, you also practice together. You can digest the many feelings after you go out. There is still a long way for you to reach the peak of Zhuji realm. Relying on the convergent place of Nimbus, you can break through in 3 days. Suli looked solemn, just like a teacher. Chi-Chin also stood up respectfully and bowed deeply. Then he sat on the opposite side of the white pool and settled down. The last 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Bei Xiaoliang's talent was better than Suli's imagination. On the second day, the pneuma of Jindan realm burst out from his body and he successfully stepped into Jindan realm. After consolidating the realm, Bei Xiaoliang stopped practicing and stood up. He couldn't hide the excitement in his eyes. He looked up and saw Suli sitting not far away to protect them. His heart was filled with deep gratitude. Another day later, Chi-Chin woke up with a shock. His momentum kept rising and then stagnated for a moment, as if he had broken through a thin film. His pneuma became mellow and restrained. The peak of Zhuji realm. Chi-Chin sighed in his heart. He had just broken through the late stage of Zhuji realm less than 3 years ago. He didn't expect that he could step into the peak of Zhuji realm so soon without any damage to his foundation. The convergent place of Nimbus is really an extraordinary place for cultivation. Gathering his mind, Chi-Chin stood up and walked to Bei Xiaoliang's side, looking at Suli's back with admiration. Both he and Bei Xiaoliang understood that they could have such a great opportunity in the secret realm of shattered spirits because of the reward from this mysterious female practitioner. Buzz! Suddenly, there was a fluctuation in the space, and a repulsive force appeared around. 3 months had passed. Bei Xiaoliang, who was still hesitating, immediately asked anxiously, "Senior, I can't repay your kindness. Please tell me your name, and I will remember it." "You don't need to know my name. You will know it in the future." Suli's figure disappeared, and her chuckle echoed in the nothingness. At the same time, at the entrance of the secret realm of shattered spirits, the calm ring fluctuated violently, and countless figures were repelled out. Suli didn't look at anything else after she came out, and directly flew to the spiritual boat to return to Huajian sect. Just at the moment when she landed on the spiritual boat, the ring of the secret realm fluctuated again, and Bei Xiaoliang and Chi-Chin appeared. A pneuma of Jindan realm diffused, and the noise in the whole scene immediately stopped, and then burst into a more enthusiastic uproar. That is Bei Xiaoliang. Bei Xiaoliang has broken through to Jindan realm. Hiss. In this way, he is the real holy son of Yushu sect. When the surviving disciples of Yushu sect saw Bei Xiaoliang, whose pneuma was more unfathomable, they were all excited and surrounded Bei Xiaoliang. First senior fellow apprentice has broken through. First senior fellow apprentice is really a genius. Our Yundan Mount is going to be rich. Bei Xiaoliang, who was in the center of the public opinion, scanned the whole scene with his divine awareness, but didn't find Suli. He couldn't help but feel regretful. Chapter 374. In the spiritual boat, the tall elder of Leiyu sect looked at the people who came back, and looked a little surprised. Although there was a token to protect one's life in the secret realm of shattered spirits, in many dangerous situations, one would die before he could use the token. For disciples of small sects like Huajian sect who entered the secret realm, the death rate was extremely high, and less than 1 out of 10 people could come back alive. But this year, out of the 20 people who went in, there were actually 3. No, it was 4 people. Looking at the spirit boat of Yushu's sect, First Elder Gao sighed with emotion in his eyes. He also got the news that Qi Chen was chosen by Beishao Liang to join Yushu's sect and became a disciple of the first sect in Zhejiu region from a casual practitioner. He had a promising future. Forget it. This kind of opportunity is not something that can be obtained easily. My cultivation is almost at a standstill. There is no point in thinking too much about it. With a sigh, the tall elder's eyes returned to the spiritual boat. He looked at Fan Zisang and changed his indifferent expression. He said with a smile, "Fellow practitioner Fan, since you have broken through, you and I can be friends of the same generation. My surname is Mo, and my first name is Su. Huajian sect is too shallow. Have you ever thought of changing to another sect?" Jindan realm was the mainstay in Zhejiu region. Every one of them was a resource worth fighting for. Mo Su, the tall elder, naturally wanted to have a try. If he could recruit Fan Zisang, he could also get a lot of rewards. Fan Zisang hesitated when he heard the words. Since he recognized Wang Yu's true colors, he had little sense of belonging to Danxia Mount. He had fulfilled his promise by entering the secret realm of shattered spirits at the risk of his life. If the mysterious female practitioner hadn't saved him, he would have died long ago. So, he didn't owe Wang Yu anything, and he could totally leave Huajian's sect to find a better way out. But, he still had two things he was worried about. "Elder, if I enter the Leiyu sect, can I bring along two junior sisters who have just stepped onto the path of cultivation?" Su Li, who was standing on the side, heard it and raised her eyebrows. Elder Mo Su was startled at first, then he was overjoyed and said, "Of course you can. If fellow Daoist Fan is willing to join my sect, let alone 2, even 10 wouldn't be a problem. Your 2 junior sisters can definitely join your faction and become inner disciples, cultivating in peace." Obviously, Fan Zisang didn't realize the status of Jindan realm. Hearing Elder Mo Su's words, he was relieved, but there was no joy on his face. He had to ask for the opinions of his junior sister apprentices, and Wang Yu was not so easy to pass. After thinking for a moment, Fan Zisang raised his head and said seriously, "Thank you for the olive branch, Elder Mo, but I can't give you a specific answer for the time being. How about contacting you after I return to Huajian's sect and deal with the things at hand?" "That's good. This is my message talisman." Mo Su handed over his token and said respectfully, "Our Thunder Imperial sect welcomes young elites like fellow Fan to join us. If fellow Fan comes to our sect, you will definitely not be disappointed." Fan Zisang reluctantly responded with a few words. Mo Su was old and shrewd. He saw that Fan Zisang was absent-minded, so he didn't continue to disturb him. Mo Su turned to Su Li and slightly restrained his smile. "Junior, I told you before that you want to join our sect. What do you think about it?" Su Li shook her head and said nothing. Obviously, she refused. "Well, it's a pity." Mo Su didn't insist. Anyway, Leiyuan sect was a top-grade sect among the 25 sects, and it wouldn't beg a practitioner in Zhuji realm to join it. Since Su Li was unwilling, he wouldn't say more. The last one was the first disciple of Yuling's sect. He also refused Mo Su and said respectfully, "Elder, please forgive me. I have been apprenticed to Immortal Bingshu." Mo Su nodded. Since he was apprenticed to the headmaster, he naturally couldn't leave the sect. Besides, he had also heard of Immortal Bingshu's means. Unless it was a last resort, it was better not to offend such a strange and ruthless person. Then, the spiritual boat fell into silence. Except for Fan Zisang, no one was in the mood to talk. Fan Zisang was not far from Su Li. He transmitted the sound several times without any response. He wanted to stand up and approach her, but he was stopped by Su Li's indifferent eyes. It seems that you don't want to expose your identity. Fan Zisong sighed secretly and finally gave up the idea of communicating with Su Li on the spiritual boat. The power of the snake locust tree in the secret realm of shattered spirits was still vivid in his mind. After he broke through to Jindan realm, he could feel the power of that monster more vividly. Not to mention that he had just broken through, even Elder Mo Su couldn't survive the means of the snake locust tree, but the senior could easily kill it. A powerful casual practitioner in Yuanying realm. Fan Zisong guessed in his heart. Thinking of Mo Su's arrogant solicitation of the senior, he couldn't help but laugh secretly. With the strength of the senior, he could be the grand elder of Lei Yu sect. How could he be interested in the position of a disciple? Seeing that Fan Zisong finally didn't take any action, Su Li slowly closed her eyes and sank her mind into the stone sea. She didn't have time to study the complete Suiyu tactics until now. As for the strange copper coin, it was obviously not suitable to pry into its mystery on the current occasion. She could only think about it after returning to Huajian sect. In the long life of cultivation, 3 or 5 days were just a short moment. Before Su Li finished sorting out the Suiyu tactics, they arrived at Wuyang City. After stopping the spiritual boat, Mo Su and Fan Zisong talked briefly for a moment and left directly. You too, I'll go back to the sect first. The young man of Yuling sect said faintly and glanced at Fan Zisong. There was not much fear on his face. He gave a fist and palm salute and turned to leave. From beginning to end, like Su Li, he did not reveal his name. Seeing that he left without saying a word, Fan Zisong couldn't have asked for more. He didn't notice his weird attitude. He turned his head and was about to say something respectfully, but was stopped by Su Li. Let's go somewhere else. Fan Zisong immediately reacted and smiled awkwardly. There were too many people here, and it was really not a place to talk freely. A moment later, in the private room upstairs of Wuyang Inn, Fan Zisong got up and poured a glass of wine for Su Li. With gratitude on his face, he said in a deep voice, "Senior, I can't repay your great kindness. I propose a toast to you first." As he said, he raised his head and drank up the wine. Su Li felt a little helpless. If she hadn't had a few words to say, she would have left long ago. The atmosphere was stagnant for a moment. She picked up the wine glass and took a sip as a response. Fan Zisong finally breathed a sigh of relief. Now he was facing a person who was more powerful than the Lord of Huajian sect, so he naturally felt pressure. Fortunately, this senior seemed to have a good influence on him, and they had some relationship, but even he didn't know where this relationship came from. Just when Fan Zisong wanted to ask, Su Li put down the wine glass and said lightly, "When you go back to the sect, you will be excluded by Wang Yu, and your reputation will be damaged. But as a cultivator, we don't need to worry about others' opinions. The innocent will know. You have a clear conscience." "Senior, you are right." Fan Zisong's eyes flickered with gratitude. He could imagine that if he left Danxia Mount, he would definitely be portrayed as an ungrateful person by Wang Yu. The feeling of being misunderstood by everyone and the despair of being helpless and isolated made him shudder with fear and anxiety. But after hearing Su Li's words, he immediately became extremely calm. Even if the entire Huajian sect regarded him as a traitor, so what? It was enough for the senior to understand him. At this time, Su Li said again, "It is unlikely that you want to bring your 2 junior sisters into Lei Yu sect, but you don't have to worry. I will arrange it. You can go to Lei Yu sect to practice with peace of mind." Fan Zisong was pleasantly surprised. "Are you serious?" Su Li glanced at him calmly. "Is it necessary for me to lie to you?" Fan Zisong suddenly shivered and said that he didn't dare to. "Okay, go back, and don't tell anyone about my existence." As soon as she finished speaking, Su Li's figure disappeared out of thin air. With Fan Zisong's cultivation, he couldn't see how she disappeared, and he couldn't help but be in awe of her. At the same time, he had more doubts. Senior, you seem to be in Huajian sect, but there is no old ancestor of Yuanying realm in Huajian sect. It's so strange. After Su Li disappeared from the private room, she didn't leave Wuyang Inn, but came to the door of the heaven-class guest room on the top floor. LVU, who was meditating and waiting in the room, immediately sensed it. He waved his hand to open the door and came out to greet her. He said in surprise, "Master, you are back." Su Li responded, and then she threw a bottle of elixir between her fingers. LVU quickly caught it and opened it curiously. Then he was shocked. Third-grade elixir. Third-grade elixir was a cultivation elixir corresponding to the level of Jindan realm. It was 100 times faster to practice with this elixir than to refine spiritual stones. Even in the major sects of the 25 sects, the third-grade elixir was extremely precious and priced by each elixir. But now, the master gave him a bottle of elixir. You are lucky to meet a few ignorant people in the secret realm of shattered spirits. Although this bottle of elixir is not a flawless elixir, it will have some effect on your cultivation. Su Li's indifferent tone made LVU twitch his mouth, but he couldn't help hesitating. Master, this elixir is obviously at the level of Jindan realm. If I take it, in his impression, although the master was stronger than him, her strength was no more than the late stage of Jindan realm. You also said that it is at the level of Jindan realm. This little spiritual power is useless to me. Su Li's tone revealed a faint disgust. In front of the massive spiritual power of the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm, she didn't even care about the 4th-grade elixir, let alone the 3rd-grade elixir. As I said before, I will naturally compensate you for taking your things. Su Li waved her hand and started to leave. LVU suppressed the shock and speculation in his heart and hurriedly followed. 4 hours later, Su Li returned to Danxia Mount and didn't attract anyone's attention. She went all the way to the quiet room where she was before. Sensing that no one had touched the tactical matrix she had set before, Su Li was a little relieved. First, she spent a few days to carefully sort out the Suiyu tactics of Zhuji realm. Then she took out the triangular copper coin and pondered. It's strange. Why can't I sense the characters on the copper coin with my psychic awareness? I can only touch them with my hands. Treasures always had something magical. Su Li didn't struggle for too long. She used her fingertips to identify the hair-like characters on the coin, which was countless times slower than scanning with her psychic awareness. After a while, Su Li fumbled out the first character. She couldn't help but look a little surprised, because she found that the characters on the copper coin were not the common characters of the modern practitioners, but the characters left from the ancient cultivation era. Chapter 375. Soul Tactics. After figuring out the first part of the general principle, Su Li fell into silence, and her eyes flashed with surprise. The general principle had few words, but the meaning was clear. This was a secret method of the soul. As the name implied, practicing this method could strengthen the soul, and even cause harm to the enemy by means of the soul. It was unheard of. Suppressing the tumbling thoughts in her heart, Su Li took a deep breath and calmed down. Her eyes flashed. Except for the opportunity to strengthen the soul in the Chuangxing path, she had never heard of any secret method of practicing the soul in the 1,200 years of practice. After the Chuangxing path, my soul has been restored to the level of the previous life, and even exceeded it. Now I encounter the soul tactics. She pinched the small triangular copper coin and pondered. Since her rebirth, she had many adventures, and the opportunities were 100 times better than those in the previous life. Was it because of the experience in the previous life that the natural law made compensation for her? As soon as this idea appeared, it was directly extinguished by Su Li. She had forgotten her identity. The body of evil ghost was originally envied by the natural law. Even if the natural law helped those cultivators who were born with Taoist body, it would never give up its hostility to her. If that's the case, does that mean my luck has increased? Su Li was thoughtful, and suddenly thought of the mysterious pneuma given to her in the third stage of the Chuangxing path. Could it be related to luck? Su Li's thought was fruitless, and her eyes were clear. Since she got the rare secret method of the soul, there was no reason not to practice it. In this way, her physical body, cultivation, and soul power could be practiced at the same time, and there was no weakness. The only obstacles that hindered her progress were time and resources. Ding, ding, the bell outside the adytum rang gently. This was the arrangement of Danxia Mount, which reminded people in the adytum that there was something outside to disturb them. Generally speaking, no one would trigger this mechanism, but this time Su Li obviously stayed in isolation for a long time. It's time to go out. The 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm is enough to solve some things. After dealing with Huajian sect, I can continue to recover. Su Li's eyes flashed, and she got up to turn the mechanism. The moment the stone door of the adytum opened automatically, a black light immediately rushed into her arms, making a meow sound. Little Black, thinking of this nightmare beast, a smile appeared on Su Li's face. She almost forgot this little thing during the 3 months in the secret realm of shattered spirits. But the nightmare fed on dreams, so many people on Danxia Mount wouldn't starve it to death. Junior sister. Ji Ning ran in with surprise and took Su Li's arm. She breathed a sigh of relief and said, "You have practiced in isolation for 3 months in a row. I was so worried." For cultivators, a few years of seclusion isn't considered a long time. What's a mere 3 months? Fan Zisang, who was behind Ji Ning, walked in with gentle eyes. Junior sister apprentice works hard. Second junior sister apprentice, you should practice hard and don't fall behind too much. Got it. Ji Ning pouted aggrievedly and didn't think much. Although she knew some details of Su Li, she didn't see Su Li leave Danxia Mount. Naturally, she didn't know that Su Li and Fan Zisang returned to Danxia Mount at the same time. After chatting for a while, Su Li and the other two sat down in the inner hall. Ji Ning sat for a while and asked impatiently, "Senior fellow apprentice, you just came back from the secret realm today. What's the matter?" "Nothing." Fan Zisang smiled slightly and said, "There is a rule in the sect that any disciple who can come out of the secret realm of shattered spirits alive can get the opportunity to soak in the spiritual pool of the main peak for 3 days. I wrote your names." 2 little girls who had just reached Yunti realm could not absorb as much spiritual energy as one in Juji realm. When Fan Zisang proposed this to the elder of the main peak, he didn't encounter any obstruction and soon got a positive answer. Really? Ji Ning's eyes immediately became bright. In the past 3 months, she had heard and seen a lot of famous cultivation treasures in Huajian sect. Among them, the one that was most praised by senior fellow apprentices was the spiritual pool of the main peak. It was said that it was built by immortal Hua Yan, the lord of Huajian sect and her peers. It contained very gentle spiritual energy and was very easy to absorb. If one practiced in it, even a practitioner in Juji realm could make rapid progress. As for a disciple in Yunti realm, his physical body was likely to transform directly, and the spiritual energy would enter his body and step into Juji realm. After a while, Ji Ning suddenly pouted, "No, if we go, what about you, senior fellow apprentice? This is the chance you got at the risk of life and death." We. Hearing this, Fan Zisang's eyes were more gentle. He couldn't help but touch Ji Ning's smooth hair. Then he glanced at the cold Su Li and didn't dare to touch her. He said with a smile, "Don't worry. The spiritual pool is useless to me. You are my two closest girls. If you don't go, I have no other candidates. It will be a waste. As he said, Fan Zisong showed a pitiful expression. Jining immediately changed her words and complained, "Don't. Senior fellow apprentice, why didn't you tell me earlier? I was worried for nothing." Fan Zisong laughed and was obviously amused by Jining. Suli was silent on the side, but she looked more relaxed than before. Fan Zisong just came back and had a lot of things to deal with, so he left soon. Jining looked at his back and was full of gratitude. With the help of the spiritual pool, her cultivation speed would be far faster than that of the disciples in the same session. Although she couldn't compare with Suli, she could be among the best. "Suli, will you go to the spiritual pool tomorrow?" After feeling happy, Jining suddenly thought of something. She looked around and asked cautiously. Suli didn't say yes or no. She said in a low voice, "The accumulation in the spiritual pool is really beneficial to you. But remember, you can't break through to Juji realm. Otherwise, you will ruin your cultivation and stop at Juji realm." Hearing this, Jining immediately broke into a cold sweat and nodded repeatedly. She originally thought that, as Suli said, she wanted to use this opportunity to break through directly, but she didn't expect that there was such a drawback. After reminding Jining, Suli didn't stay long and continued to go back to the quiet room to copy the soul tactics. This time, she didn't hang up the "Do Not Disturb" sign. After all, she couldn't achieve anything by practicing in isolation for a day. Early the next morning, as soon as the best time for practice passed, Fan Zisong appeared in front of the hall and asked warmly, "Junior sister apprentices, are you ready?" "Senior fellow apprentice." Jining, who was wearing a pink disciple robe, ran to Fan Zisong with a happy face. Suli walked slowly behind her with an indifferent expression as always. Seeing the two girls, the bitterness in Fan Zisong's eyes disappeared completely. He waved his hand and a flying cloud flew over. "It's late. Let's go to the main peak." "Okay." Jining responded, and then a trace of doubt flashed in her eyes. She couldn't help but ask, "By the way, senior fellow apprentice, why haven't I seen Master recently?" A trace of unnaturalness flashed on Fan Zisong's face. He forced a smile and said, "Master is a little busy. You should see her when you come back from the spiritual pool." Jining didn't doubt him. She nodded and soon left her doubts behind. She looked at the direction of the main peak with expectation in her eyes. Seeing this scene, Fan Zisong sighed in his heart. "I hope what Senior Wang said is true." He didn't count on Wang Yu, who was cold and indifferent. Suli glanced at Fan Zisong's worried look. She didn't say anything and turned to look at the main peak. There was a trace of hesitation in her heart, but it was soon replaced by determination. The time had come. Why should she escape? The flying cloud rose straight up. After crossing the sea of clouds, it finally came to the top of the sea of clouds, the square of the hall of the main peak. It seemed that the spiritual pool was about to open, so the hall of the main peak was heavily guarded at this time. The pneuma in the air made Fan Zisong nervous. This was the second time he came to the hall of the main peak. When he was very young, he was ignorant and didn't fear it. Now he knew that there were far more practitioners of Jindan realm on the main peak than on other peaks. But even so, he was still calm. After all, he had stepped into Jindan realm. Although there was a gap, it was not big. Seeing Fan Zisong's performance, the elder in the dark couldn't help but nod secretly. He said to himself with pity, "Fan Zisong has a good temperament. I don't know what happened on Dansha Mount. Why did he leave the sect? Even the spiritual pool of Jindan realm can't attract him." Well, as long as Wang Yu agrees, I don't care. After a few breaths, Fan Zisong had taken them to the gate of the hall of the main peak. A dignified elder in a white robe stepped out of the hall and said solemnly, Fan Zisong, have you really made up your mind? Fan Zisong bowed quickly and said in a deep voice, First Elder, I have made up my mind. You! Alas! First Elder shook his head and sighed. He couldn't force Fan Zisong. But as the first elder of Huajian sect, he naturally hoped that Fan Zisong could stay and contribute to Huajian sect. Seeming to know what first elder was thinking, Fan Zisong saluted again and said, Even if I am in the 25 sects, I dare not forget the kindness of Huajian sect. I will try my best to learn from the senior fellow apprentice of Fujian Mount and become a core disciple of the 25 sects to enhance the influence of Huajian sect. At this point, First Elder couldn't blame Fan Zisong, so he waved his hand and said slowly, In this case, you can leave now. Yes, First Elder. Fan Zisong heard the rejection in First Elder's words, but he didn't care. He turned his head to give Jining and Su Li an encouraging look and left without hesitation. He believed that Su Li and Jining would not be in any danger on the main peak. Senior fellow apprentice, Jining stared blankly at Fan Zisong's departure, and finally realized that something was wrong. Subconsciously, she was about to say something to Su Li when First Elder suddenly waved his hand and took them away from the place. After a while, the white cloth in front of Su Li's eyes faded, and the entrance of a cave came into view. It was dark in the cave, and nothing could be seen, like a huge mouth that was about to swallow people. This is the forbidden area of Huajian sect, and also the location of the spiritual pool. You two little girls, follow me closely and don't fall behind. The first elder instructed and walked inside. A strange look flashed in Su Li's eyes, and she walked behind. Jining showed a look of fear on her face. She quickly pulled Su Li's sleeve and followed in a panic. Chapter 376. The cave was not deep. After walking for a while, they reached the end. A pool of ethereal spiritual pool with light green mist came into view. Is this the spiritual pool that senior fellow apprentice mentioned? Jin Ying's eyes sparkled. She took a deep breath and suddenly felt that her body was cleansed by the green pneuma, which was extremely comfortable. This spiritual pool was built by our headmaster in imitation of the secret realm of shattered spirits. It is made by soaking hundreds of spiritual flowers. The spiritual power is mild and pure, which is of great benefit to practice. You too should cherish it and don't waste this opportunity. First elder turned back and said. Su Li and Jining agreed in unison, and then stepped into the pool one after another, sitting down and slowly meditating. Seeing this scene, First Elder was relieved and turned away. Shortly after he left, Su Li opened her eyes quietly. She caught a wisp of flower nimbus with a light wave of her hand, and her eyes flashed with contemplation. Although there are many kinds of flower nimbus, it is indeed the spiritual pool that Hua Yan and I built together. It is divided into 2 levels. This should be the upper-level spiritual pool used to reward disciples in Juji realm. I remember that there was a secret passage leading to the lower-level spiritual pool used by disciples in Jindan realm. Thinking of this, Su Li glanced at Jining, who was concentrating on absorbing nimbus by the side of the pool. She quietly got up and left the spiritual pool. She walked silently to the smooth stone wall at the end of the cave, and pinched a strange tactical pattern mark with both hands. The originally tightly closed stone wall immediately cracked, and a stone peak that could allow one person to pass through appeared. A desolate breath came from the stone path in the stone crack. Su Li frowned slightly and flashed into it. The stone crack immediately disappeared and returned to its original appearance without any flaws. It was dark in the deep stone path, and the ground was rugged, but it didn't affect Su Li's speed. It seems that this stone path has been abandoned since it was built. Even if I maintain it with the tactical matrix, it has been damaged. With this thought in mind, Su Li went down along the sloping ground. After a while, she finally saw a light. At the same time, a strange laughter came from the light. Giggle, under the bright spiritual stone lamp, 3 figures appeared. Su Li's good friend, Immortal Hua Yan in a purple robe, was sitting in the spiritual pool. On the bank of the spiritual pool, Su Zini, the manager of Zhenlo group of Danxia Mount, was standing. Su Zini was dressed in a red dress with light makeup, looking radiant. She squinted her phoenix eyes and looked down at Immortal Hua Yan condescendingly. She chuckled and said in a threatening tone, "Lord Hua, do you still want to continue the stalemate with me?" At the same time, the cold-faced elder behind Su Zini took a step forward, full of pressure. His cultivation had reached the peak of Jindan realm, and he was half a step away. Reaching the realm. Hua Yan's face is slightly pale. She forcibly suppresses the discomfort in her pubic region and sneers coldly, "You've invited a half-step Yuanying realm expert to help me. Miss Su, you really think highly of me." At the same time, Hua Yan sighed in her heart. She thought that Wang Yu and others had successfully prevented Su Zini from getting the treasure integrated into the tactical matrix, but she didn't expect that Su Zini had already succeeded in secret. Today, she took people to the bottom of the spiritual pool without anyone noticing. She almost broke through to Yuanying realm, but God was not on her side. The breakthrough was interrupted at the critical moment, and she was seriously injured immediately. At this moment, she was no match for Su Zini, not to mention Yuanying realm. The forbidden area was sealed all year round, so she couldn't send a message to other elders for help. She was like a fish on the chopping block. Su Zini smiled sweetly. "Immortal Hua Yan, what are you talking about? You were as famous as Holy Girl Su in those days. Now Holy Girl Su has passed away. Although she hasn't broken through to Yuanying realm, she has cultivated for more than 2,000 years, and her foundation is unfathomable. I can't be too careful." Hearing Su Zini's seemingly complimentary but actually sarcastic words, Hua Yan didn't get angry. Instead, she nodded approvingly. "Yes, even if I am doomed to die today, my means are not what you, a junior of the Su family, can deal with." Su Zini's face changed slightly, and she finally stopped joking. She sneered, "Immortal Hua Yan, you deserve to be the task of a holy girl. However, why do you want to die for a broken tactical matrix? Hand over the key of Starstack tactical matrix, and I won't embarrass you. Don't force me to use extreme means." Hua Yan lowered her head and sighed. "I also want to hand over the key." Su Zini was slightly happy when she heard her tone was relaxed. Before she spoke, she heard the second half of Hua Yan's words, "But I don't trust the credibility of the Su family. Besides, I can't give the relic of my best friend to the Su family that she hates the most." As soon as this was said, Su Zini immediately became extremely ugly, and she said in a cold voice, "You dare to fool me? Elder Qi, do it." Swish. The cold-faced elder was about to punch forward immediately. Hua Yan's eyes flashed coldly with determination. She touched the blood-colored stone in her arms and was about to crush it. All of a sudden, clatter. The sound of 2 stones falling sounded extremely harsh in the quiet underground forbidden area. The cold-faced elder's face changed slightly, and he immediately stopped and looked in the direction of the sound. Was there someone there? He didn't notice it at all just now. Hua Yan also looked back in surprise. The forbidden area was different from the outside world. How could someone come at this time? At the same time, she couldn't help but feel a little surprised. But when she saw that the person was a little girl of 13 or 14 years old, wearing a pink dress unique to children with immortal latency. The rising hope was immediately extinguished. It turns out to be a lost child with immortal latency. Su Zini obviously knew Huajian sect very well. She was relieved after seeing Su Li, but she was also afraid of any changes, so she said quickly, "Elder Qi, we have no time to lose. Kill the girl as well." The cold-faced elder nodded and slapped Su Li from a distance. He was used to being an executioner, and he had no pity. It was the easiest to kill the child with immortal latency first. "How dare you? I'm not dead yet. If you want to kill a disciple of Huajian sect, you have to kill me first," Hua Yan said with a grim expression. She ignored the injury in her pubic region and flew out of the spiritual pool. The blood-colored stone flew out of her arms, which was full of cracks in the blink of an eye and was about to explode. Sensing the extremely evil pneuma in the blood-colored stone, Su Zini's beautiful face changed. She waved a spiritual power to interrupt it, but at this moment, swish! The blood-colored stone covered with cracks suddenly disappeared out of thin air, and Hua Yan and Su Zini were both stunned. At this time, there was a loud bang in the distance. The two looked at the same time, only to see the cold-faced elder retreating in horror until he retreated to Su Zini's side. "Elder Qi, what's going on?" Before Su Zini figured out the situation, Elder Qi gasped and said with a hint of surprise, "I hit a barrier with my palm just now, and was almost injured by the countershock. That girl is not an ordinary person." Su Zini's face changed slightly, and she immediately looked at Su Li. Then she fell into a complete panic. When did that stone end up in the hands of this little girl? Su Li frowned and held the blood-colored stone. She mobilized the power of the star-stacked matrix. After a while, all the cracks on the blood-colored stone disappeared, and the evil pneuma disappeared completely. Seeing this, Su Li breathed a sigh of relief. She looked up at Hua Yan, who was full of surprise and doubt, and said helplessly, "I have told you before that this thing is evil, and it's better to discard it earlier. I didn't expect that you still have it with you." Hearing this, Hua Yan's calm face was completely changed. Tears appeared in her eyes, and she trembled. You are," with a gentle smile on her face. Su Li nodded gently. Then she put away the blood-colored stone, and looked at Su Zini and Hua Yan. Her eyes turned cold, and her lips curved into an evil smile, "A lost child with immortal latency. I am not lost. How dare you attack my good friend? Have you thought about how to die? A good friend of immortal Hua Yan. A girl of 13 or 14 years old. No. Anyway, Su Zini was the seventh miss of the Su family. She thought of something quickly. She looked horrified and screamed, "Holy girl Su, you are not dead." Su Li smiled indifferently. Her fingertips stroked the universe ring, and a pocket-sized dagger flashed. "You are the first person who said my name after I came back to the secular world. In return, I will let you die quickly." Swoosh! In a moment shorter than the blink of an eye, a bright sword light flashed, which even Elder Qi couldn't capture. A blood mark appeared on Su Zini's neck. The light in her eyes dimmed quickly, and she fell to the ground. "Run!" Elder Qi was scared out of his wits. He was full of horror, and there was only one thought in his mind. He didn't care about Su Zini's body at all. Without saying a word, he turned around and fled to the gap of the tactical matrix that had been broken. Puff! The same bright sword light flew out through the heart. Elder Qi didn't have time to say his last words. He fell in front of the gap, and looked at the exit with remorse. His pneuma dissipated quickly, and finally disappeared. Su Li stretched out her hand, and the dagger flew back to her hand with a swish. She looked relaxed. When she was in the 8th hurdle of Lianqi realm, she could deal with the power of the peak of Jindan realm with only her physical body, not to mention that she had passed the star path and reached the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm. In terms of strength, even Su Li didn't know where her limit was now. However, at least she could have a try to fight with the practitioners in Yuanying realm, who were once regarded as powerful by her. Su Li. Hua Yan walked to Su Li excitedly and looked at Su Li from left to right. Finally, she took a deep breath and said nothing. She just compared Su Li's height, which was not fully grown, and said seriously, "I am much taller than you now." Su Li couldn't help but laugh. She waved a green spiritual power into the spiritual pool. "Heal first. I won't leave in a short time." "Okay." Hua Yan didn't hesitate and immediately returned to the spiritual pool to heal. There was no need to ask more questions between close friends. 2 days later, Hua Yan's injury was completely healed. A pneuma that was about to break through emerged, and it was even stronger than that of the last breakthrough. Seeing this, a trace of guilt flashed in Su Li's eyes. When the news of her death spread, although many people gloated and were happy, many people were also sad for her. Among them, Hua Yan must be the one who was sad and pitiful for her. Even Hua Yan's difficulty in breaking through for so many years was likely to be related to her. Chapter 377. Whoosh, genuine energy surged through the water and made a sound. Su Li narrowed her eyes and saw a round golden elixir spit out from Hua Yan's mouth. It broke and reorganized quickly, gradually forming a little person sitting cross-legged. Su Li immediately breathed a sigh of relief. It was very dangerous to break the elixir and form the Yuanying without enough accumulation. Hua Yan's accumulation was very terrible. This step was completed in the blink of an eye without any sloppiness. What was left was the molding of the Yuanying. The clearer the face of the Yuanying was, the more terrible the strength would be. Seeing that it would take a long time for Hua Yan to mold the Yuanying, Su Li also sat down on the shore. She touched the universe ring and took out the tactical matrix plate for camouflage from Qinxianghan. After looking at it carefully for a moment, she put her fingertips into the circular pattern in the center of the tactical matrix plate and pressed it gently. Crack! The mechanism was triggered. The circular tactical matrix plate immediately popped out a circle of arcs and turned into a very regular ball. Su Li's eyes narrowed, and her pupils showed shock. This was the usual method of tactical matrix, but it could only be used when one reached the master realm. The tactical matrix plate made by the tactical matrix master was not a complete whole, but composed of many tactical rings. The number of tactical rings determined the difficulty of making it and the level of the big tactical matrix released by the tactical matrix plate. The 9-ring tactical matrix plate is close to the master realm. No wonder it can even deceive the rules of the secret realm of shattered spirits. In this way, I don't have to worry about exposing my identity in a short time when I master this tactical matrix. Su Li breathed a long sigh of relief because the tension of breaking through the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm was mostly gone. She was lucky. Even if she couldn't find the fragments of reincarnation mirror to improve the shielding power, it didn't matter. However, the 9-ring tactical matrix plate was still 1 ring away from the master realm. The power of shielding the nature's mystery was limited. When she reached a certain realm, it would inevitably fail. She couldn't ignore the matter of finding the fragments of reincarnation mirror to restore reincarnation mirror. While pondering, Su Li also wondered who made this thing. In Zhuzhou region, there was no tactical matrix master who was close to a grandmaster. Could it be that someone had made a big step forward from the master realm in the past 1,000 years? After thinking for a moment, Su Li stopped thinking. If there was such a person, she would definitely meet him in the future. In her previous life, she had reached the middle stage of the master matrix and was not far from the late stage. Now she had a lot of experience. With the help of the matrix plate of 9 rings, it would not take long for her to reach the late stage. But she had no time and energy to make the matrix plate of 9 rings. After spending a quarter of an hour to familiarize herself with the matrix plate, Suli closed the mechanism and put the matrix plate back to its original state. Then she took out the triangular copper coin and continued to sense the characters. Time passed unknowingly. One day and one night later, Hua Yan, who was sitting in the floral spiritual pool, trembled. She spat out a mouthful of turbid air that resembled a white dragon. It stayed in the void for a moment before dispersing. Then, she opened her eyes and felt the completely different nascent soul power in her body. She couldn't suppress the joy in her heart. After cultivating for more than 2,000 years, he had finally reached the original infant stage. Suli seemed to feel something. She raised her head and saw this scene. She couldn't help but smile. Hua Yan, congratulations. Although the voice was light, it was full of sincerity. Hua Yan came back to herself and chuckled, saying, I won't thank you. I have helped you manage the sect for so many years, and I can still afford this little reward. Suli rolled her eyes helplessly. When she founded the sect, she clearly said that Hua Yan was the only owner of Huajian's sect because of her sensitive identity. But now she obviously wanted to deny it. However, she was no longer Holy Girl Su now. Although her identity was more dangerous than before, it was hidden in the dark, and no one knew it. She didn't bother to argue about who the owner of Huajian's sect was. Seeing that Suli didn't refuse this time, Hua Yan's eyes suddenly lit up. After more than 1,000 years, she finally figured it out. Holy Girl Su seemed to be glorious, but she was also controlled by Yushu's sect. Although Huajian's sect was small, it completely belonged to her. Of course, she also understood that Suli was not burdened by fame back then. The only one worthy of her sacrifice was Elder Mo Qin. Li, since you have chosen to show up, what are your plans next? Hearing Hua Yan's question, Suli smiled indifferently, but the message revealed in her eyes made Hua Yan feel inexplicably cold. If I die, everything will be over. But, since I am still alive, I will naturally clear up the mess of those years. As soon as she said this, Suli's eyes flashed coldly. Hua Yan swallowed quietly, only feeling that the soles of her feet were cold. She stared blankly at her friend whom she hadn't seen for many years, and finally realized that the gentle, kind and simple female practitioner in the past, the holy girl Su who could not even say a harsh word, had completely changed. At this time, Suli suddenly turned back, smiled sweetly, and said, Am I a little scary now? No. Hua Yan was stunned for a moment, and then immediately shook her head. With tears in her eyes, she bit her lip and choked, I'm just a little happy that our holy girl Su can finally protect herself. She had persuaded Suli more than once that a person of cultivation should not have a simple and warm heart, but every time, she got an indifferent smile from Suli. She didn't know how many times she sighed secretly. While sighing, she also secretly helped Suli to block many open and secret attacks. She didn't tell Suli about these. But when she saw Suli again as time went by, some things on her mind couldn't be hidden and were exposed. Suli pursed her lips and smiled. She was so sensitive that she understood it as soon as Hua Yan mentioned it. But the words, thank you, couldn't offset these things. In the future, the burden of Huajian's sect will not be carried by you alone. Suli nodded softly. Hua Yan covered her mouth and cried with joy. She couldn't help but step forward and hug Suli tightly. Great. No matter what the 25 sects are, we sisters will make Huajian's sect survive for a long time if we work together. Suli's eyes were not wet, but as soft as water, and she said softly in her heart. What I want is more than just survival. After a short while, Su Li and Hua Yan both put away their emotions, adjusted their clothes, and sat opposite each other. After all, both of them were over 2,000 years old, and they couldn't control their emotions like ordinary women. By the way, this is for you. Hua Yan smiled and took out an old rune from the universe ring. Su Li took it and smiled. This was the ancestral rune of the sect she made. As long as she was within the range of the star-stacked tactical matrix, she could inquire about all the news of the whole sect at will and talk directly with all the elders. Of course, if she encountered treasures like the tactical matrix for camouflage, it wouldn't work. I asked you to make 2 at the beginning, but you didn't want to. Now it works. Hua Yan snorted and returned to the usual tone of talking with Su Li. She didn't look like a mighty practitioner in Yuanying realm at all. Su Li couldn't help but laugh. After so many years, Hua Yan was still the same as when she met her for the first time. It was so nice. Holding the ancestral rune for a moment, Hua Yan immediately learned about the recent situation from the first elder. She couldn't help frowning. Li, Fan Zisang left the sect. Yuk, Su Li shook her head. I won't interfere with his decision and let him go. My identity is sensitive now, and anyone involved with me will be in danger. You should also be careful. Hua Yan was slightly shocked. Although Su Li's words were vague, she didn't doubt her at all. It was an extremely shocking thing for a 13-year-old to recultivate to the level of Yuanying realm. In the future, I will still practice in Danxia Mount. You send someone to pay attention to Wang Yu. As long as she doesn't hinder me, don't touch her. Hua Yan said yes and didn't say anything. In the past, with Su Li's temperament, when she saw such a heartless person as Wang Yu, she would be angry and punish her to uphold justice for Fan Zisang. But now, Su Li's approach was a little confusing. She could clearly perceive that Su Li took good care of the junior named Fan Zisang. Well, Jining should wake up in 3 days. Contact me at any time if you need anything. Su Li shook the ancestral rune in her hand and disappeared in a flash. Hua Yan was stunned and smiled bitterly. She lamented that her old friend's temperament had become eccentric and profound, but she was happy for her rebirth. She was the only one who could understand the complicated feelings within. Su Li quietly returned to the upper spiritual pool and saw that Jining was still trying to absorb the spiritual power and suppressed her cultivation to the peak of Yunti realm. She couldn't help but smile and sat down to continue to study the triangular copper coin. A few hours later, 3 days were up. First Elder Hua Bei appeared in front of the cave on time. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "It's time. Su Yu, Jining, come out." Jining was awakened and immediately climbed out of the spiritual pool. The water vapor on her body evaporated, and her big innocent eyes were full of excitement. Hualing Pool, it was really great. 3 days saved her several years of hard practice, and she directly reached the peak of Yunti realm. As long as she consolidated for a period of time, she could directly break through to Lianshui realm. Clatter, the sound of water behind her made Jining look back. Su Li calmly walked out of the spiritual pool and said softly, "Go out." Jin Ying's eyes turned into crescent moons, and First Elder waited at the door for a long time. When he saw the 2 little girls coming out, he pretended to nod naturally and said, "The peak of Yunti realm is very good. Now go back to Danxia Mount." "Yes, Elder." Jining and Su Li both responded obediently and left with the steward. First Elder looked at their backs and fixed his eyes on Su Li. He felt strange. Why did the headmaster tell us not to interfere with any action of this little girl? Could it be that he has taken a fancy to her innate talent? But there's nothing special about a 70% spiritual root. Even if he likes her, why does the headmaster ignore her and let her stay on Danxia Mount? I really can't figure it out. Shaking his head, First Elder didn't care too much. It was difficult to figure out the headmaster's mind. They just needed to follow the orders. At this moment, on Dansha Mount, Jining walked around the waist of the peak, but she didn't see Fan Zisang. She couldn't help but look lost and murmured, "What First Elder said is not true. Senior fellow apprentice is really..." At this moment, a sneer came from behind. Chapter 378. Hearing the voice, Jining didn't get angry. Instead, she trembled slightly and suddenly looked back. When she saw Jin Wei coming from a distance with an arrogant face, all kinds of bad memories of her childhood in the Jincheng Imperial Palace immediately came to her mind, which made her little face as pale as snow. Royal brother, why are you here? Aren't you? Jining was so scared that she began to stammer. Until Su Li gently held her little hand, she calmed down and regained her senses. The Jincheng Imperial Palace was no longer under the control of the Empress, and she was not as weak as before. What was there to be afraid of? Seeing that Jining recovered so quickly, Jin Wei's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't show it immediately. He sneered and snorted, "My good sister, do you want to ask why I am not in the Ymen Mount?" After that, his pneuma shook, and he exuded the pneuma of Lianqi realm. The first hurdle of Lianqi realm. Jin Ying's eyes suddenly widened. She made rapid progress by relying on the Hualing pool. What did Jin Wei rely on? How could he directly break through? Seeing Jin Ying's reaction, Jin Wei finally felt that his identity and status were back in his hands. He couldn't help laughing and said proudly, "Thanks to Master Wang Yu, I have been accepted as her last disciple. Fan Zisang is a traitor, and I will kill him sooner or later. You are just an ordinary disciple of the Master. Call me senior fellow apprentice." Su Li was calm. With her eyesight, she could naturally see at a glance that Jin Wei's cultivation was spoiled by excessive enthusiasm. It was the end of his life when he reached the peak of Lianqi realm. If he didn't rely on external forces, it was not a problem for Jin Wei to reach Zhuji realm with his talent. He destroyed his future to improve his cultivation, and he was still proud. Obviously, he didn't know anything. Wang Yu, Su Li glanced at the silent hall behind her. Her eyes were deep, and no one knew what she was thinking. Jining was shocked and angry when she heard Jin Wei's words. Her lips trembled with anger, and she didn't know what to say. Finally, she put on a straight face and stubbornly said, regardless of the old man in the costume of a supervisor standing behind Jin Wei, "I only have one senior fellow apprentice, not you." You. Jin Wei's smile disappeared, and he was even angrier. After changing his expression several times, he finally became serious and said coldly, "Little bitch, like your mother. Steward Wu, teach her a lesson." As he said, he turned his eyes and fell on Su Li, who was standing quietly. He said covetously, "And this little beauty? Take her back to the bedroom." He immediately nodded with a smile. He stepped forward and slapped Jin Wei's face, and grabbed Su Li with the other hand. He was Wang Yu's henchman, and Wang Yu let Jin Wei do whatever they wanted. Naturally, he would not disobey her, even if what was happening in front of him had seriously violated the sect rules. Master! Master, Master, Wei! Jining retreated in fear and shouted. Jin Wei laughed and said, "All of this is tacitly allowed by the Master. How can he come to save you?" His face was full of pleasure, but at the same time, there was a hint of lust. She thought that she would never be able to get Jining again in this life, but she didn't expect that after just a few months, not only did Jining become her plaything, but she also had an unexpected harvest. Stop! At this critical moment, an angry roar suddenly came from the horizon. At the same time, a flying sword turned into a white light and flashed. Poochie! The fifth steward's arms fell off. Ah! The atmosphere was stagnant for a moment. The scream of the fifth steward suddenly spread to the sky. Jinwei, who was still fantasizing in his mind, was scared and ran away without saying anything. He did not care about the fifth steward at all. But before he ran far, a cold snort came from the nothingness. When did such a scum appear in Huajian sect? Let me clean them up. Before he finished his words, the sword light lit up again. Jinwei was scared out of his wits and cried, "Master, save me." Clang! A red light shot out from the hall on the top of the mountain and blocked the white light. With a clang, two flying swords were inserted between the legs of Jinwei. In the next moment, a voice more tragic than the fifth steward's resounded through Danxia Mount, causing the disciples of all peaks to stop what they were doing and look up curiously. Danxia Mount. What's going on? Li Guang of Fujian Mount put down the half of the dagger in his hand irritably and sighed. Well, it's not suitable to study runes today. I remember that Wang Yu should be on the peak. How could something go wrong? He had doubts in his mind, but he did not hesitate. He flashed out of the hall and flew to Danxia Mount. At this moment, on Danxia Mount, a cold and tall young man floated from the nothingness. When he saw Wang Yu flying out of the hall, his eyes showed undisguised hatred. You can't distinguish right from wrong and are selfish. Old witch Hong Yu, you are still as disgusting as before. Su Li, who stood still as if she was scared, saw the person, and an unexpected surprise flashed in her eyes. Why did he appear here? In her mind, it should be the first elder of the main peak who stopped him, but she did not expect. Wang Yu did not seem to hear the young man's sneer. Instead, she stared at the familiar face of the young man and frowned. After a while, she finally remembered the identity of the young man. She panicked and trembled. You are Beixing? Ha! Su Li tilted her head and glanced at Wang Yu. Wasn't he Bei Xiaoliang? Bei Xiaoliang grinned when he heard the words, showing his teeth glowing with cold white light. I haven't seen you for 100 years. I'm really honored that martial uncle Hong Yu still remembers me. Wang Yu was instantly distracted. How could Bei Xiaoliang let go of such a good opportunity? He pinched the sword gesture with his fingertips, and the flying sword turned into a white rainbow, stabbing at the former's throat like lightning. Su Li raised her eyebrows and did not stop him. But things in the world never went as one wished. Second brother. A vigorous voice sounded from behind Bei Xiaoliang, full of excitement and longing. Bei Xiaoliang, who almost succeeded, immediately trembled. The sword gesture disappeared, and the flying sword fell to the ground with a clang. Wang Yu recovered from the shock. When she saw Li Guang behind Bei Xiaoliang, the haze in her eyes became more intense. But in the blink of an eye, the haze disappeared, and her expression changed to that of anger. Senior fellow apprentice Li, your disciple is really arrogant after going to the 25 sections. She even wanted to kill me just now. What Wang Yu said seemed to be true, and he also saw the scene just now. He could only suppress the joy in his heart for the time being, frowning and asking, Second brother, is it true? In the face of his master's accusation, Bei Xiaoliang sighed in his heart. He turned back and stared at Wang Yu coldly, saying word by word, Master, if I say that the so-called genius with acquired physique of sword who was accepted by the 25 sects was fabricated by Wang Yu, will you believe it? What? Li Guang's eyes widened, and he was shocked. Nonsense. Wang Yu looked exasperated, as if Bei Xiaoliang was really deceiving everyone. I spoke for you in front of that senior in vain, and helped you rise to the top in one step. Now that you have become a practitioner of Jindan realm, you come back to slander me. Is this how you repay your benefactor? Benefactor. Bei Xiaoliang almost vomited when he heard Wang Yu's words, and his tone became colder. You imprisoned me for 10 years and made my life worse than death, and you want me to recognize you as my benefactor. How dare you? Wang Yu's almond-shaped eyes widened, and she snapped, when did I imprison you? All these years, I have contributed to the sect conscientiously and never left. If you want to slander me, you have to find a suitable explanation, right? Li Guang stood aside, and the more he listened, the more confused he became. On one side, it was his disciple whom he regarded as his own, and on the other side, it was his junior sister apprentice whom he had been with for nearly 1,000 years. Which side should he believe? A glimmer of light flashed in Su Li's eyes, and she listened with great interest. It seemed that finding Wang Yu was more interesting than she thought. Li, I personally brought Wang Yu into the sect. She has a clean background and a good talent, but Hua Yan's voice came into Su Li's ears through the ancestral rune, and her tone was a little disappointed. She also saw that Wang Yu was a little weird now. It doesn't matter. People always make mistakes. I'll deal with the matter of Wang Yu. What's the matter with the young man named Beixing? Su Li interrupted her. Hua Yan breathed a sigh of relief and replied, I have some impression of Beixing. He made a name for himself in the sect more than 400 years ago. Although he doesn't have the heavenly spiritual root, he has a superb state of mind and fast practice. After breaking through the Zhuji realm, he traveled with Wang Yu and was accepted as a disciple by the 25 sections. Since then, he has never come back. Now it seems. The so-called 25 sects, Su Li curled her lips slightly and took over the topic, it's just an excuse. Hua Yan was silent and furious. If Su Li hadn't stood on the scene, she would have shown up and questioned Wang Yu. Don't worry too much. Although he was imprisoned for 10 years, he lived a good life after escaping. How do you know? Hua Yan was stunned. I saw him before. While the two were talking, there was a new change on the top of Danxia Mount. Master, you don't believe me. Senior fellow apprentice, my friendship with you for 1,000 years is not as good as this little bastard's 300 years. Bei Xiaoliang and Wang Yu stared at Li Guang. Li Guang was full of bitterness. In desperation, he finally looked at Jining and Su Li. As for Jin Wei, he had fainted because of the pain at the moment. You two little girls should be Jining and Su Yu. Now I want to ask you, why did they fight just now? Seeing this scene, Wang Yu's eyes immediately brightened. She secretly transmitted the sound to Jining and Su Li, you can't lie against your conscience about how I treat you. Just now, when Jin Wei made trouble, I happened to be practicing in isolation. Sorry to scare you. Jining suddenly felt pressured. Thinking that Wang Yu did treat her disciples well in ordinary days, her doubts in her heart faded a lot. But she still felt very disgusted that Wang Yu saved Jin Wei's life with her sword just now. Therefore, she naturally turned her eyes to Su Li. It was better for her junior sister apprentice to make the decision for such a big event. Seeing this, Li Guang asked bluntly, little girl Su, you say it. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on Su Li, including Bei Xiaoliang. Su Li raised her eyebrows. It was hard to tell whether she was too scared or she was really indifferent. Chapter 379. Master. Master, I don't know how she treats me. Senior fellow apprentice Jean bullied me. Su Li's expression froze for a moment, and she seemed to have just reacted. Her face was full of panic, and her voice came out in a stutter. Wang Yu was angry when she heard it. She secretly scolded Su Li for being so weak that she was scared out of her wits by this scene. Forget it, Li Guang sighed. It was better to investigate by himself than to expect a teenage girl to explain the reason. Master, you said that they are all apprentices of Wang Yu. Even if they can tell us the reason, we can't believe it. For now, we can only ask the Lord to come out and preside over it. Then we will know who is right and who is wrong. Bei Xiaoliang temporarily put aside his inquiry about Su Li and stared at his master seriously. Li Guang was speechless. The Lord had been practicing in isolation for a long time, but this was a secret of Huajian's sect, and it couldn't be said on such an occasion. Wang Yu sneered secretly. If Huayan was still alive, how could she dare to be so blatant? Su Zini's means were not simple. Bei Xiaoliang sensed Li Guang's embarrassment and frowned. Everything seemed to go back to square one, and no one could tell who was the villain. Su Li stood on one side and held Jining, who was pale, without saying a word, like an outsider. She was not stupid enough to expose herself in such a crowded environment. After a moment of stalemate, Li Guang sighed in his heart and said softly, "Second brother, you just came back, and you must be very tired. How about going back to the mount with me to have a rest? I will send a letter to the headmaster. No matter what the result is, I will give you an explanation." Bei Xiaoliang's body tightened, and he stared at Wang Yu, who was fearless. Finally, he couldn't stand the faint pleading in Li Guang's tone and nodded in agreement. After his eyes stayed on Su Li for a moment, he flew away with Li Guang. When the figures of the two disappeared into Fujian Mount, Wang Yu's calm face was completely gloomy. Seeing Jin Wei, who had fainted, and the two shivering female disciples, she was so angry that she swung her sleeves and left. Although she very much wanted to punish Jining and Su Li, who failed at the critical moment, Bei Xiaoliang was still on Fujian Mount. She was not stupid enough to take action at this time and be caught. At that time, even if the Lord did not come out, the first elder of the main peak would have the right to deal with her, which was not what she wanted. We're only missing one offering, yet something has to go wrong at this time. Wang Yu returned to the main hall with urgency in her eyes. It's not long before the appointed time. At this moment, after Jining and Su Li were taken back to the bedroom by the maids, they were immediately strictly guarded, which made Jining feel a little bad. But under Su Li's hint, she did not try to resist and obediently went back to her room to practice. Su Li also returned to the quiet room and sat cross-legged. She took out 2 universe rings from her pocket, which were obtained from Su Zini and the elder, who was half a step to Yuaning realm. The Su family is still the same as before, overflowing with wealth. Scanning the storage of spiritual stones in their universe rings with her psychic awareness, Su Li sighed in her heart. If she still followed the ordinary path of cultivation, these resources would be enough for her to practice to the late stage of Jindan realm. But now, for the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm, it was just a drop in the bucket. Thinking of this, she quickly shifted her attention to an area carefully kept by Su Zini. Suddenly, her eyes focused, and a rune with a pale yellow halo fell out with a slight weight in her hand. This seems to be the key to a cave, and it's not complete. Su Li looked at it carefully for a moment and suddenly remembered that Su Zini asked Hua Yan for Starstack Tactical Matrix before. Was it related to this thing? The use of Starstack Tactical Matrix was not only to protect the sect. When she was a holy girl, she once used Starstack Tactical Matrix to break the inhibition of several caves and won a large number of cultivation resources for Yushu's sect. If that's the case, then everything will work, Su Li guessed with 80% certainty. With Su Zini's wealth, there was no need to focus on the extremely troublesome Starstack Tactical Matrix. It would be much easier to get the resources from the higher-ups of the 25 sections. However, since it has come to the step of breaking the inhibition, all the keys should have been born, and Su Zini also has contact with other people who hold the keys. Thinking of this, Su Li quickly opened the universe ring of the elder, who was half a step to Yuaning realm, but didn't find a similar key in it. If I had known this earlier, I would have kept her alive and searched her soul. Sully felt a little pity, but she didn't worry about it. If Su Zini really had contact with other key owners, sooner or later someone would find out about Hua Jian's sect if Su Zini didn't show up. I don't know if the resources of a cultivation cave can help me step into the 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm and officially Zhuji realm. Sully put away the 2 rings and looked at them leisurely. Although she was now only 1 level away from the legendary 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm, she felt that there was a natural moat in between when she really practiced, and the energy needed was immeasurable. She had prepared hundreds of Zhuji elixirs for herself before, plus the universe rings of Su Zini and the Elder. There were 300 Zhuji elixirs. Ordinary practitioners could transform the genuine energy of Zhuji realm at most 300 elixirs. No matter how deep the foundation was, it was absolutely enough. At the 17th hurdle of Lianqi realm, she could choose to break through to Zhuji realm at any time, but seeing the legendary realm in front of her, how could she be reconciled? Of course, if it took too long or she really couldn't break through, Sully wouldn't fight to the death like the ancient disciple Black Lotus mentioned. She was still young now, and she could afford to delay for a while. After sorting out her thoughts, Sully took out a top-grade spiritual stone and held it in her hand, and fell silent. At the same time, on Fujian Mount. Master, is what you said true? Headmaster hasn't come out for 100 years. Bei Xiao Liang's expression changed slightly. For Hua Jian's sect, Hua Yan was the pillar. If anything happened to Hua Yan, Hua Jian's sect would definitely suffer an unprecedented impact. Li Guang nodded with worry. If not, how could the headmaster not show up when there was such a big conflict on Danxia Mount? I dare not disturb her easily, in case other sects notice something wrong. Bei Xiao Liang's heart sank. After a moment of silence, he said, Master, do you know what I saw when I was imprisoned by Wang Yu? Second brother, she is your senior master after all. Li Guang's face was slightly ugly. He really didn't want to listen to Bei Xiao Liang continue to slander Wang Yu. Bei Xiao Liang's mouth was full of bitterness, and he roared with a trace of pain in his deep tone, Master. I saw first senior fellow apprentice there. As soon as this was said, Li Guang's body shook violently, his eyes were scattered, and his lips trembled uncontrollably. You, what did you say? Bei Xiao Liang showed guilt and deep hatred. First senior fellow apprentice, was killed by Wang Yu in order to save me. He turned his palm, and his simple universe bag embroidered with the character Heng appeared in his hand. Li Guang stared at the universe bag blankly, and his eyes gradually turned red. Li Heng, the former first disciple of Fujian Mount, was his biological son. Li Heng had been missing for many years, and he still had a glimmer of hope in his heart, but he didn't expect that. It was Wang Yu who killed him. Master, I have refined the first-grade Jin Dan. Wang Yu is no match for me. I'm going to kill her now. Bei Xiao Liang gritted his teeth and walked out with his sword, but was stopped by Li Guang, whose eyes were red. Master. Bei Xiao Liang felt cold in his heart. He had proved that what he said was true. Could it be that the master still didn't believe him? Li Guang took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, Wang Yu hid too deeply. I'm worried if you go. Bei Xiao Liang was stunned, and then his heart was filled with warmth and guilt. At the moment when he was stunned, Li Guang showed an unprecedented coldness on his face. He reached out and waved his hand. The small black sword on the sword rack in the hall buzzed and turned into a ray of black light that went into Li Guang's body. You and I will go together and kill her in person. Bei Xiao Liang's expression changed, and then he nodded fiercely. The two were about to go out of the hall side by side. However, at this moment, a slightly lazy female voice rang out. You are not allowed to go anywhere. Before the voice died away, the hall of the main peak of Fujian Mount was immediately covered by a transparent light curtain, which was extremely hard and could not be broken by people in Jindan realm. Such a change suddenly made Li Guang and his disciple absent-minded. Then they thought of something and suddenly looked behind them. A woman in a purple and gold Taoist robe stood quietly in the center of the hall. Her face was delicate and indifferent, with a trace of undisguised anger between her eyebrows. Headmaster. Li Guang was shocked. Sensing that Hua Yan's pneuma had become as elusive as the ocean, the sadness and anger in his heart were diluted a little. He asked in surprise, "Have you broken through?" Hua Yan nodded slightly. "Congratulations, Headmaster." Bei Xiaoliang hurriedly saluted. Although he had to leave Huajian's sect that year, he still regarded himself as a disciple of Huajian's sect in his heart. "Don't stand on ceremony. I will personally investigate the matter of Wang Yu. If, as Beixing said, she has made an unforgivable mistake." Speaking of this, Hua Yan's eyes narrowed slightly, and there seemed to be a flame burning in them. "My anger is not so easy to bear." Hearing Hua Yan's guarantee, Bei Xiaoliang finally calmed down. Then he hesitated for a moment and said, "Headmaster, I was lucky to escape that year. Wang Yu's strength is definitely not as simple as it seems, and she has mastered many secret methods. Headmaster, you must not take it lightly." Hua Yan smiled slightly. "Don't worry. The Grand Elder of our sect will deal with this matter in person. No matter how many means Wang Yu has, she can't compare with the Grand Elder. She can't even escape from Huajian's sect now." "Grand Elder. I have been away for hundreds of years. When did the sect have a Grand Elder?" Bei Xiaoliang looked at his master inquiringly, but Li Guang was also puzzled. The most powerful person in Huajian's sect was Hua Yan. Where was the Grand Elder? Moreover, now that Hua Yan had broken through to Yuaning realm, what about the strength of the Grand Elder? Hua Yan knew that they were full of doubts, but she didn't explain. She just told them, "Don't tell anyone about my coming out of practice, including the existence of the Grand Elder. Do you understand?" Hearing this, Li Guang and Bei Xiaoliang could only temporarily suppress their thoughts and salute helplessly. Chapter 380. Several days passed in the blink of an eye. Wang Yu didn't know that her every move was under the surveillance of Hua Yan, but she seemed to be used to being cautious and didn't do anything special. After a few days of fermentation, the news that Bei Xiaoliang had returned to Huajian's sect also spread in the sect. The acquired sword body, fabricated by Wang Yu, was so famous that he was known by all the disciples in the sect in a very short time. Many disciples went to visit him out of admiration, but were all turned away. Bei Xiaoliang was not in the mood to do other things before he got his revenge. In the side hall of Danxia Mount. In the dim quiet room, Su Li suddenly opened her eyes, revealing a pair of deep eyes. Then she looked at the thick stone powder piled up around her and couldn't help but sigh softly. In just a few days, she had devoured all the more than 30,000 upper-grade spiritual stones in the universe rings of Su Zini and Su Li, but the spiritual power accumulated in her pubic region was only pushed from 1% to 2%. After all, those were upper-grade spiritual stones. One upper-grade spiritual stone was equivalent to 10,000 low-grade spiritual stones, and the spiritual power in upper-grade spiritual stones was purer than that of low-grade spiritual stones, so there was no need to remove too many impurities. 30,000 spiritual stones pushed 1%. Does it mean that if I want to reach the 18th hurdle of Lianqi realm, I need at least 9 million upper-grade spiritual stones? Su Li muttered to herself. She was shocked and sighed secretly. She used to be in Yushu's sect, so she had an estimate of the inventory of spiritual stones of the 25 sections. Even if the inventory of the 25 sects were added together, they might not have such a number of upper-grade spiritual stones. Little Suli, the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm is not as simple as you think. As if sensing Su Li's worry, Black Lotus pretended to be old and childish, and the black ring appeared on the ring finger at the same time. After a period of rest, the luster on the surface of the ring was obviously smoother than before, but it still looked rough. What do you mean? Su Li frowned. 9 million upper-grade spiritual stones were exaggerated enough, but according to Black Lotus, it seemed that the condition was far from enough. Of course. Black Lotus snorted naturally. Do you think the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm is cabbage on the street? Even in the cultivation circle at that time, there may not be a monster of the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm in 10,000 years. Do you think it is difficult? Su Li's face was slightly gloomy. It was so difficult. However, you don't have to worry too much. This king is a treasure of the clan after all. It just so happens that I have the method to break through the 18th level. As for the lack of spiritual power, if the sects in one domain are not enough, we can go to other domains. Hearing Black Lotus's obscene tone, Su Li raised her eyebrows and said abruptly, "You really have confidence in me. Do you think that I have the ability to deal with those old monsters in Huashan realm who are in charge of the major sects?" Black Lotus was speechless and embarrassed. He forgot that those evildoers in ancient times were supported by sections. Even if they went to other sects to plunder, they were not alone. With Su Li's current strength, it was simply courting death to fight against a big sect. Just as he was in a dilemma, Black Lotus suddenly exclaimed in surprise. His voice became solemn. "The smell on your body is a little strange." Su Li was slightly shocked, and her psychic awareness quickly spread all over her body to check carefully, but she did not sense any attached pneuma. "Are you sure?" "I don't feel anything." Su Li told the truth, but it surprised her. "I didn't feel anything. How could it be possible? Don't you feel uncomfortable?" The more Su Li listened, the more confused she became. She said in a deep voice, "I haven't encountered any crisis recently. Why would I feel uncomfortable?" Black Lotus suddenly fell silent. It seemed that his worldview accumulated in countless years suddenly collapsed. Whether it was Chuangxing Path or other things, why all the laws didn't work for Su Li. Black Lotus sighed deeply and was defeated. He said, "I clearly smell a trace of the divine thunder of the 5 elements from you. The divine thunder is extremely harmful to the ghost clan. How can you not feel it?" Divine thunder of the 5 elements. Su Li tilted her head. It was another strange noun. "Yes." Black Lotus responded. He sent a wisp of pneuma around Su Li and then returned to the ring. His tone was more certain. "The divine thunder of the 5 elements is divided into 5 kinds: gold, wood, water, fire, and earth. The pneuma on your body is confirmed to be the divine thunder of the earth." Divine thunder of the earth. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and quickly recalled the objects she had recently touched in her mind. Suddenly, she narrowed her eyes and reached out to wipe Su Zini's universe ring. The token with a pale yellow halo reappeared. As soon as this thing appeared, Black Lotus immediately screamed. The ring swooshed into Su Li's body, and a slightly panicked voice came into Su Li's awareness. "See. Put it away. The pneuma of the divine thunder of the earth on this thing is extremely strong. I am too weak now and can't stand it." Su Li quickly put away the token and frowned slightly. She was a body of evil ghost and belonged to the Forbidden Ghost clan. According to Black Lotus, she should be more afraid of things with the pneuma of the divine thunder. But now, why didn't she feel anything when she held it in her hand? Whoosh! "Su Li, are you?" The token disappeared, and Black Lotus' ring reappeared. Black Lotus's doubtful voice was with a trace of unprecedented fear. The human clan with the body of evil ghost can perfectly avoid the defects of the two races. Is it possible? Hearing Black Lotus frightening himself, Suli didn't have much fluctuation in her heart. Everything was Black Lotus's speculation. Even if it was somewhat reasonable, it had to be verified when she became stronger in the future. Black Lotus, let's talk about my physique later. Don't forget the important thing. Where is the method to break through the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm? Called back to reality by Suli, Black Lotus took a deep breath and finally calmed down temporarily. After a moment of silence, a mass of black light was thrown out from Black Lotus' ring. Suli caught the black light, but she staggered and almost fell down. This. She was shocked and stared at the seemingly light black gauze in her hand. It was so heavy. The strength of her one arm was comparable to that of a monster in Yuanying realm, at least 50,000 kilograms, but she almost couldn't catch the gauze. This is my trump card treasure, called Heavy Soul Robe. Take it and have a look. Black Lotus smiled and encouraged Suli to wear it. Knowing that Black Lotus wouldn't hurt her, Suli didn't hesitate and directly put on the gauze. The gauze, which originally seemed quite large, immediately shrank itself and stuck to the surface of Suli's outer clothes. It was ordinary and inconspicuous. But at the moment when the gauze was adjusted, Suli felt an indescribable weight pressing down on her. This pressure not only acted on the body but also on the soul. Even her soul, which had been strengthened in Chuangxing Path, felt dizzy at this moment. Taking a small step, Suli gasped and said laboriously, "What is the use of this clothes?" Black Lotus didn't explain, but just smiled and said, "You will know after a while. Although it is a little hard, if you want to break through the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm, you must wear it until the breakthrough." Holding the wall and sitting down again, Suli's eyes darkened. Finally, she just nodded and didn't ask again. "By the way, little Suli, since you are not afraid of the divine thunder of the 5 elements, you can explore the cave where the token is located. If you can find the celestial crystal and spiritual stone accompanying the divine thunder, it will definitely make a big step forward on the road to the 18th hurdle of Lianchi realm." Suli's eyes immediately flashed a breathtaking light. "I see." For the next few days, Suli didn't step out of the quiet room. Fortunately, Wang Yu seemed to have given up on her and Jining, so no one disturbed her on the way. 4 days later, the stone door of the quiet room was pushed open. Suli walked out as usual, but her steps were extremely slow, with deep exhaustion hidden in her eyes. The heavy soul robe suppressed her too much. Not to mention practicing, even moving her hands and feet would make her feel very tired. However, she could practice to Jindan realm on her own in the previous life, so her toughness was not comparable to that of ordinary people. After 4 days of sleepless adaptation, she finally managed to maintain daily activities. As for practicing, she didn't think about it for the time being. Every time she practiced, the suppression of the heavy soul robe would increase. Black Lotus didn't remind her. She almost vomited blood and was seriously injured when she tried it. "Hey, junior sister apprentice, you are out of practice." Jining couldn't help but be surprised to see Suli. Although she felt that Suli walked a little slowly, she didn't care much. After all, Suli gave her the impression that she was unhurried. When Suli saw Jining, she smiled and asked, "How are you recently?" "Nothing. I'm just a little bored. It seems that Master forbids us to leave the hall. I don't know what to do." Jining jumped to the edge of the high bench and said carelessly with her legs in a panic, but there was some unconcealable worry in her eyes. She could feel that something was wrong with Wang Yu. "Forbids us to leave." Suli's eyes flickered slightly. She communicated with the ancestral rune, and Hua Yen immediately responded, "Li, Wang Yu is still hiding in the hall and hasn't left." But just 2 days ago, she sent a communication rune out. I tracked her for 100,000 miles, but it was cut off. Suli pondered for a moment and replied, "It doesn't matter. When the person she contacted comes, there will be clues." Okay. I will continue to pay attention. Hua Yan's voice faded away. Suli ordered LVU, who was hiding in Dansha Mount, to monitor Wang Yu, and then immersed herself in the difficulty of adapting to the heavy soul robe. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. In the past half a month, Bei Xiao Liang didn't leave and lived alone in the hall of the first disciple of Fu Zhen Mount. As for the original first disciple of Fu Zhen Mount, he had already died in the secret realm of shattered spirits, and the new first disciple had not been selected, which saved a lot of trouble. Your Highness, the headmaster only allowed you to go out for a month. Now half a month has passed. In the hall, Bei Xiao Liang sat cross-legged on the rush cushion, with a small flying sword lying across his chest and rotating slowly. Beside him stood an ordinary-looking old man, but his cultivation had reached Yuanying realm. Although he was only in the early stage of Yuanying realm like Hua Yan, he should not be underestimated. In order to protect the safety of the Holy Sun, Yushu's sect had made a lot of efforts. Hearing the old man's question, Bei Xiao Liang opened his eyes and said slowly with deep eyes, "Wait a little longer. If the headmaster doesn't take action, I will do it myself." The old man shook his head helplessly and retreated respectfully, but he sneered at Hua Jian's sect in his heart. In this sect, except for Hua Yan, he didn't sense any existence of Yuanying realm at all. In his opinion, what Hua Yan said half a month ago was just a prevarication. Chapter 381. Li Wangyu is making a move. The sound came without warning. In the side hall of Dansha Mount, Suli saw Jining, who had broken through Lianqi realm, happily put on the official disciple costume of Hua Jin's sect. She smiled faintly, but her eyes suddenly burst with light. LVU. Yes, Master. LVU, who was hiding in the forest to practice, immediately turned over and rushed in the direction Suli pointed. At the same time, the all-spirits tactics ran quietly, and his pneuma immediately disappeared from the star-stacked tactical matrix. Hua Yan, who sensed this abnormality, couldn't help but be shocked. Li's new servant really has some special skills. After tracking Wang Yu's pneuma for a moment, Hua Yan suddenly felt that Wang Yu was shrouded in nothingness. Although she knew that Wang Yu was there, she couldn't see what Wang Yu was doing through the tactical matrix. Li. Suli put on the official disciple costume and the heavy soul robe. Her figure paused slightly, and then returned to normal. Her movements were calm, without the sluggishness half a month ago. Don't worry, LVU will keep an eye on it. She was confident that even the first level of all spirits tactics couldn't be discovered by practitioners in Jindan realm and Yuanying realm. What's more, LVU was inspired by her, and now the all spirits tactics was only one step away from the second level. At this moment, Wang Yu received a response on the messaging jade rune. She covered her trace and came to the dense forest at the foot of Dansha Mount, unaware that she had been watched. When she came to the usual meeting place, Wang Yu worriedly passed through the edge of the tactical matrix and saw a man dressed like a scholar standing not far away with his hands clasped behind his back. She couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. She quickly stepped forward and saluted, "Greetings, Immortal Bingshu." The man turned around, revealing an indifferent yellow face. He was the headmaster of Yuling sect, Bingshu. Wang Yu and Bingshu had known each other for a long time. LVU, who was hiding in the dark, was shocked. He didn't make any sound and continued to watch. Ahem, Bingshu covered his chest and coughed slightly. He said slowly with no expression, "Junior, there is no such thing as meeting today in my deal with you." Wang Yu subconsciously tightened her body, suppressed her fear, and said quickly, "Senior, please don't be angry. If it wasn't for the unexpected incident, I wouldn't have dared to disturb Senior's cultivation even if I had 10,000 guts." What happened? Tell me. Bing Shu responded and waved his sleeves. It was hard to tell whether he was happy or angry. Wang Yu's face became more gloomy. After a moment of hesitation, she said with difficulty, "The opening of the cave needs sacrifices. I found a suitable candidate, but I didn't expect that he was disabled and useless." Hearing what Wang Yu said, Bing Shu was not angry, but laughed instead. "Wang Yu, if I remember correctly, I have a good relationship with Wang Yu. That ancient cave dwelling will open soon, right?" "Yes," Wang Yu braced herself and answered, burying her head in her chest. She didn't dare to look up at Bing Shu's increasingly sharp eyes. "Earlier, you didn't mention that offering is required to open the abode. You hid this from me. Could it be that you want to obtain some benefits from me?" "I wouldn't dare." Wang Yu was in a cold sweat. "I just think that I can handle this little thing, and there is no need to bother you, so keep your thoughts to yourself." Bing Shu snorted softly, which turned into thunder in Wang Yu's ears, shaking her delicate body slightly and bleeding from the corner of her mouth. While vomiting blood, Wang Yu was relieved. She knew that she had passed this hurdle. No matter what purpose she had hidden before, immortal Bing Shu would not pursue it for the time being. With great benefits in front of him, immortal Bing Shu would not be so angry that he would ignore the treasures of the ancient cave dwelling. "Tell me, what kind of offering do you need?" After a long time, immortal Bing Shu's voice came out. Wang Yu was delighted and quickly said, "It must be a person who has just stepped into Lianqi realm under the age of 16, male or female. This kind of person has not lost his inborn power and has just started to attract acquired spiritual power, so he is a good offering. Moreover, he can't have any resentment against me. The higher the trust, the better the effect of casting the spell." The more Bing Shu listened, the more he frowned. Especially when he heard the last one, his brows were almost wrinkled. Where could he find such a person in a short period of time? Wang Yu also understood the difficulty of this matter, and couldn't help but say embarrassedly, "I have accepted 2 good seeds and carefully cultivated their feelings, but I didn't expect that the ungrateful Fan Zisong not only ran away by himself, but also led the 2 little girls astray, which is extremely difficult to deceive. So I settled for the second best and found a brainless inferior." Speaking of this, Wang Yu thought of the day when Bei Xiao Liang appeared. Li Guang questioned, and Jining and Su Li were wavering, and she couldn't help but hate them. She trusted Fan Zisong so much that she didn't notice the changes of the 2 girls. What a blunder. "I see." Immortal Bing Shu's brows loosened. "It's not difficult. Since the 2 girls have just joined the sect, they won't have a deep memory of anyone. I'll teach you an enchanting skill." After that, immortal Bing Shu didn't wait for Wang Yu to respond and pointed between her eyebrows. Wang Yu immediately sensed a profound mystic chant pouring into her mind, and she was immediately attracted to it and concentrated on understanding it. At this moment, she didn't find that while she was understanding, she also inhaled a group of inconspicuous green light, which penetrated into the depth of her awareness and disappeared. Seeing this, LVU was very afraid and left quietly. He wasn't a practitioner who hid in a region, and his knowledge was far greater than that of ordinary practitioners. From immortal Bing Shu's action, he had already seen something, and dared not to stay any longer. Fortunately, the all-spirits tactics was indeed a very precious mystic method, and even the mysterious immortal Bing Shu didn't find the existence of LVU. After returning to his residence, LVU immediately reported what he saw to Su Li in detail. Su Li sat at the table and listened to it, holding her chin thoughtfully. The unfathomable immortal Bing Shu. She wanted to see the true face of this person in the selection battle of the secret realm of shattered spirits last time, but immortal Bingshu didn't show up the next day. She didn't see this person with her own eyes, so she couldn't judge the truth of this person. It seems that Wang Yu has been thinking about the boy with immortal latency for a long time. She likes us because we have the opportunity to step into Lianqi realm in a short time, and Fan Zisong also helped Wang Yu unconsciously. Su Li figured out the reason and couldn't help but smile meaningfully. She said to Jining, who was looking at her curiously, "Jining, how about playing a game?" "A game?" Jining blinked her eyes and didn't understand. The next morning, Wang Yu came to the side hall with a soft and gentle smile on her face. She pushed the door open and walked in. With immortal Bingshu's indoctrination, she had completely mastered the enchanting skill in just one night. The opening of the cave was imminent, and it was time to take action. "Yu, I'm here to see you." A gentle voice came out, and Jining and Su Li ran out of the room almost at the same time, and saluted in unison, "Master." Wang Yu was stunned when she saw the two in cyan clothes, and then she was ecstatic. These two girls had both broken through Lianqi realm. God was on her side. She took a deep breath and showed the kindest smile that she thought was on her face. She walked slowly to the two little girls and squatted down. "Let me see how your cultivation is progressing." As she spoke, she pointed her hands between Jining and Su Li's eyebrows like lightning, and shouted in her heart. "Secret skill, Enchanting." Then she saw that the clear eyes of the two little girls quickly became blank and confused, like puppets who lost the ability to think on their own. "It works." Wang Yu was refreshed and seized the time to tamper with their memories. She wanted to change all the memories of Fan Zisong into herself, so that they could establish the most intimate relationship. At the same time, immortal Bingshu, who was far away in Yuling's sect, coughed softly, and a smile appeared in his eyes. At the same time, in a blessed cave far away from Huajian's sect, a roar suddenly came from an elegant house standing in the beautiful mountains. "What's going on?" The dignified elder in black looked gloomy. He looked at the servants kneeling on the ground and said in a stern tone, "A bunch of good-for-nothings. You don't even know the whereabouts of your master. What's the use of keeping you? Elder, please spare my life." The mammy kneeling in the front looked miserable when she saw the broken soul token in the elder's hand. According to the rule of Su family, if the master died, all the servants must be buried with him. They had no way to live. Sure enough, the elder in black looked serious the next moment. "Miss Chi died mysteriously. As servants, how can you continue to live?" Ignoring the begging of the crowd, he stretched out his hand and slapped out. The wind turned into a horrible pressure and swept over. In the blink of an eye, all the servants were crushed into meat patties, and blood was everywhere. After killing dozens of people in one breath, the elder in black still looked gloomy. The 7 young ladies of the Su family were equivalent to the title of the holy girl of the sect, and they were all precious treasures of the Su family. Although the one who died was the last among the 7, it was still an immeasurable loss. "Come on. Find out where 7th young miss went on her last trip." As the elder in black gave the order, the whole accord immediately began to work in full swing. The way of cultivation was originally against the natural order. It was too normal for the geniuses in the family to die young. The elder in black was not angry because of Su Zini's death, but because he didn't know where Su Zini died. If Su Zini's close elders asked and he couldn't tell them the reason, he would definitely be punished. "Damn Su Zini, even after her death, she still won't let me have peace." Cursing bitterly in his heart, the elder in black flicked his sleeves and left. He couldn't stay at home until he got the exact news. At the same time, in the courtyard where the elder of Ymen branch of Zihan sect lived, there was a sound of things being smashed. "Yulin, my granddaughter, in the addendum, Yu Wutao's old face was ferocious, and he clutched his chest with one hand, feeling heartbroken. His cultivation life was full of ups and downs, and he only had one descendant, Yulin. Yulin couldn't stand out in Zihan's sect, so he arranged Yulin to go to Huajian's sect, which had more benefits. Unexpectedly, Yulin died in Huajian's sect. Wang Yu, when I come out, I will make you give me an explanation. Chapter 382. In the evening, the setting sun was like blood. Wang Yu sat cross-legged in the quiet room. She spat out a mouthful of turbid air and opened her eyes. Her pale face showed a trace of redness. I didn't expect that the secret skill would consume so much energy. With my cultivation, I almost couldn't hold on, a trace of fear flashed in Wang Yu's eyes. Then she looked up and saw Su Li and Jining standing aside obediently. Their expressions were full of intimacy and reverence. She couldn't help but feel that it was all worth it. Bing Shu, no matter how you calculate, you will never know how important these two sacrifices are. Wang Yu sneered in her heart. With a flash of light in her palm, a giant umbrella and a broken porcelain doll appeared in her hands. The two little girls who had been enchanted trusted her so much that they didn't need to be secretive when taking out these things. In any case, it was impossible for these two girls to return alive from this trip to the cave abode. Su Li, who was standing on the side, saw these two things with her eyes flashing slightly. Wang Yu is not brainless. She has already thought of a way out. The umbrella was a middle-grade concealment magic treasure, which could isolate the detection of tactical matrix. It was a rare thing. The broken porcelain doll was more precious, called life-substituting porcelain. Although the name was exaggerated, it made some sense. As long as a trace of spiritual power was injected into it, it could emit the breath of the caster for a long time to confuse the enemy's detection. With these two treasures, it was really easy for Wang Yu to escape from Huajian's sect. Of course, Wang Yu couldn't expect that there would be a fatal flaw in her perfect plan, which was created by herself. It's getting late. Let's go. After arranging everything painfully, Wang Yu took a deep breath, opened the umbrella, and covered Su Li and Jining with it. Then she pinched a gesture casually. Rumble, a stone staircase leading downwards appeared on the floor of the quiet room. A strange smell of blood mixed with a strange aura assaulted his nostrils. Jin Ying's face changed slightly, showing fear. But when she remembered Su Li's instructions, she immediately restrained her expression, held Wang Yu's hand tightly, and followed her down. Su Li also pretended to be nervous and followed her. Feeling the strength of the palms on both sides, Wang Yu smiled slightly, with determination in her eyes. Both the life-substituting porcelain and the identity of the head of Huajian's sect are huge losses for me. The ancient cave, please don't let me down. As they walked, the three of them gradually disappeared from the bottom of the stone staircase, and the mechanism closed again. In the dark stone path, Su Li staggered a little, as if she couldn't see the road clearly. But her psychic awareness quietly tilted like Mercury and searched Wang Yu's secret station. The smell of blood is still strong. Over 100 years, more than 1,000 people have died here, and they are all practitioners in Juji realm. If I'm not mistaken, this is the place where Bei Xiaoliang escaped from. Su Li frowned slightly. Seeing such a slaughterhouse-like place and the torture mentioned by Bei Xiaoliang before, she thought of a very annoying practitioner. Obviously, Wang Yu just took this place as a shortcut to get out of the sect. She walked quickly with the two girls and came out of the addendum in less than 10 minutes. She drove the flying sword from a secret exit halfway up the mountain. Su Li and Jining sat at the end of the flying sword, surrounded by the protective tactical matrix specially prepared by Wang Yu, so they didn't have to worry about being blown down by the strong wind pressure. Su Li quietly watched the scenery on both sides of the flying sword changing, and the distant memories in her mind gradually returned. Jojo region, she couldn't be more familiar with it. Jining looked at the strange scenery under the flying sword blankly. She was young and naturally couldn't have Su Li's knowledge. However, although she was simple, she was also smart. She suddenly understood that she had bet her life on Su Li. Su Li won't hurt me. Jining cheered herself up and forced back the tears of fear in her eyes. At this moment, there was no room for her to regret. A day and a half later, Su Li saw that Wang Yu couldn't stop smiling, and knew that the destination was coming. Seeing the stone forest under the flying sword exuding a faint gloomy atmosphere, she gently pursed her lips. It turned out that the ancient cave was in this Blackstone River. The name Blackstone River was given by the practitioners in Jojo region because they walked in it without seeing the sun all year round. In addition, the stone was dark, so it had such a straightforward name. Although the name was simple, Blackstone River was one of the most dangerous places in Jojo region. There were very special stone ghosts wandering in it. They had low intelligence but high strength. Thinking of this, Su Li felt a vibration of the flying sword. Then it dived down and turned into a red light shooting into the black stone forest. The bright light in the sky quickly dimmed. When it landed, it had become as dark as the night, and one couldn't see his fingers. Master, Jin Ying's voice trembled violently. At this moment, she couldn't care less about Su Li's instructions and couldn't help asking for help. Wang Yu chuckled in her heart. Not only did she not have the slightest doubt, but she felt that this was a normal reaction. As for Su Yu, she was dull in nature, so it was normal that she didn't cry out. Snap! A spiritual stone lamp lit up and dispelled the surrounding darkness. Jining saw the two people around her, especially Su Li. She finally calmed down and her fear faded. Follow me. It's not dangerous in the stone forest, but it's not something that you two little girls can deal with. Wang Yu reminded them in a gentle voice. She identified the direction and immediately turned to the sparse forest on the right. Looking at her familiar appearance, it was obviously not the first time for her to come here. Su Li kept silent and followed her. Suddenly, she felt that Jining held her arm, and the coldness in her eyes eased a little. She gently patted Jin Ying's hand and sent a warm feeling. Jining felt a little relaxed. She cheered up and followed Su Li. After an hour, an old man's laughter suddenly came from the forest. Fairy Hong Yu, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Su Li crossed the last slope, and the view suddenly became clear. In the protective boundary not far away, there was a camp. There were more than 10 people moving in it. The old man who just spoke was standing in front of one of the tents, looking at Wang Yu with a smile. Seeing the old man, a trace of fear flashed in Wang Yu's eyes, but she smiled like a flower and apologized, I'm entangled with worldly affairs. Senior Yuan, please don't blame me. Oh, Fairy Hong Yu, you must be joking. It's not the opening time of the cave yet. As long as you don't miss the important matter, you can come at any time. The old man responded very kindly. His turbid eyes suddenly turned and stared at Su Li and Jining aggressively. Jining couldn't help but hide behind Su Li. Then the old man seemed to be aware of it and smiled to cover up, what's wrong with you? These two little girls are really beautiful. What a pity, Wang Yu chuckled and overshadowed the old man's words. She bowed slightly and said, Senior Yuan, if there is nothing else important, can you let me go? Oh, I'm so stupid. Come in quickly and don't be discovered by the stone ghosts. The old man patted his head and quickly stepped aside. Watching Wang Yu and Jining go away, the smile on his face slowly disappeared and he sighed again. What a pity, but he didn't say what exactly was a pity. Wang Yu walked into the camp and directly occupied a tent. After slightly tidying up 2 shops for Suli and Jeaning to rest, she couldn't help but feel gloomy when she thought of the smile of the old man surnamed Yuan. The opening of the cave is imminent. I hope that old madman doesn't cause any trouble for me. 2 days later, seeing that the old man surnamed Yuan didn't take any action, Wang Yu was a little relieved. She let Suli and Jeaning go out to walk. As sacrifices, they couldn't feel unhappy. It was obviously not a long-term solution to stay in the tent. Junior sister apprentice, what is this place? Walking to the mud road in the middle of the camp, Jeaning looked around and couldn't help but ask in a low voice when she saw some practitioners who didn't look like good people. Suli glanced at her and didn't speak. Think about what I told you before. Hearing the sound, Jeaning was slightly stunned and then calmed down. Suli didn't tell her much, just one sentence, stay with me, and you won't be in danger. After comforting Jeaning, Suli inadvertently glanced over the tents. She didn't spread out her divine awareness, but only sensed that there were at least 3 Numas of Yuanine realm. Wang Yu is just in Jindan realm. Why does she have the confidence to cooperate with these people? With some doubts in her mind, Suli continued to walk forward. When she was about to walk to the edge of the boundary, she suddenly stopped and fixed her eyes on a young man who was holding a sword and resting with his eyes closed in front of a tent. Jeaning, who was behind her, bumped into Suli's back and couldn't help but cry out in pain. She rubbed her forehead and also looked over. It seemed that the young man holding the sword felt the gaze and opened his eyes. When he saw 2 girls who were obviously in their teens, he was surprised. He hesitated for a moment and didn't intend to meddle in other people's business. He couldn't even protect himself now, so he didn't have time to care about others. Seeing the young man's expression change, Suli turned her eyes and walked directly to the young man. This action immediately attracted the attention of the old woman in red in the tent. But when she saw that the 2 girls who came were just in Lianqi realm, she immediately thought of something. With a smile on her face, she closed her eyes again and ignored them. Senior fellow apprentice, you look like a friend of mine. May I ask your name? When she approached, Suli hesitated for a moment and asked timidly. The young man looked cold and didn't intend to answer. But when he saw the 2 little girls looking at him pitifully, he couldn't help but feel soft-hearted and sighed. My surname is Dongfang, and my first name is Dongfang. Sure enough. Suli's eyes flashed imperceptibly, but she looked disappointed. She whispered, you are not brother Wuxue. As soon as she said this, the young man who had been cold immediately breathed heavily. He suddenly stood up and asked impatiently, do you know Dongfang Wuxue? The voice seemed to be a little louder, and even the old woman in the tent opened her eyes again and looked at Suli. Chapter 383. Under this pressure, Suli's little face showed a flustered expression, and she quickly waved her hand. Not Dongfang. His name is Wuxue. I was wrong. As she said, she took Jin Ying's hand and fled the place in 2 or 3 steps. You scared her. The old woman narrowed her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, don't you want to go and have a look? These 2 girls are likely to have seen your father. Dongfang Yi was tempted at first, but when he heard this, he immediately seemed to be splashed with cold water, and his eyes became clear. He took a deep breath and snorted, so what? I have nothing to do with him now. How can a mere trace compare to the opportunity in front of me? The old woman suddenly laughed when she heard the words, you are worth teaching. It's worth my effort to bring you here. Dongfang Yi ignored the old woman and sat down again to rest with his eyes closed. But his heart was far less calm than it seemed. His father had been missing for decades, and he had been looking for him for decades. Some time ago, he got the news that his father had been seen in the Black Stone Forest. Old Lady Duhua happened to find him, so he came here. But he didn't expect that before he entered the cave, there was news of his father. I have to leave. If I don't come back in 10 years, don't look for me. Dong Fang Yi's heart tightened when he recalled his father's resolute words when he left. His mother died in childbirth for him, and he was brought up by his father with great care. The feelings hidden under his stern face became clearer as he grew up. Although his status in the Dongfang family plummeted after his father's disappearance, and he was no different from a servant, he never had any resentment against his father. "Father, where did you go?" Su Li sighed deeply in her heart, and the surroundings of the tent returned to silence. Su Li took Jining back to Wang Yu's tent and took a nap. Although she left just now, she heard every word of the conversation between Dongfang Yi and the old woman. This Dongfang Yi is the son of Dongfang Wuxue, and it is not difficult to speculate that Dongfang Wuxue is missing. Su Li thought about it and contacted a lot of information. Those who entered the world in the reincarnation mirror were all the top talents in Qingshui's circle. Dongfang Wuxue was obviously a lucky person. He survived when the reincarnation mirror was broken, and he had a Taoist companion, married a wife, and had children. Dongfang Yi was not old. Based on her perception, she guessed that his bone age would not exceed 200 years. In other words, Dongfang Wuxue disappeared in the past 100 years, which had little to do with reincarnation mirror. It's a pity. If I could meet him, I might be able to find out what happened after I died through his mouth. With a trace of regret in her heart, Su Li opened her eyes and looked at the distance of nothingness. There was a trace of longing in her eyes that even she did not notice. At the same time, in a teleportation matrix of an extremely distant large region, Su Buwang looked at the names of other large regions that emerged on the formation map. He frowned tightly when he saw the name of one of the regions. Zhuzhou region. It's the place that person went to back then. Thinking of this, he snorted coldly and pointed to the big region next to Zhuzhou region. Bad luck. I won't go to the place where that person has been. In the past few months, he had traveled through many big regions by the teleportation matrix, but he avoided all the places where Lingli had been. He did the same when he encountered Zhuzhou region, but he didn't know that he missed an excellent opportunity to meet the person he missed. Back to the Black Stone Forest, on the third day, a large number of strange Numas suddenly appeared in the bounded domain camp. Su Li sensed that there were at least 50 practitioners of Jindan realm. When did the practitioners of Jindan realm in Zhuzhou region become so worthless? Seeing Wang Yu giving an order and hurrying to the main tent of the camp, Su Li's thoughts were surging, and her expression was slightly dignified. Many of those practitioners of Jindan realm were familiar to her, but more were unfamiliar to her, and their dressing was very different from that of the practitioners of Zhuzhou region. There are practitioners of other big regions participating. This ancient cave is not as simple as I thought. Glancing at the key of divine thunder of earth lying quietly in the ring with her psychic awareness, Su Li calmed down. No matter how big the scene was, she had seen it. A cave that only affected 2 or 3 big regions was not worth her mind to be shaken. Seeing that the main tent was isolated by a layer of tactical matrix, Su Li couldn't eavesdrop, so she simply sat back in the tent and meditated. Whether it was Sueyu tactics or soul tactics, she hadn't fully understood them. If she wanted to get started before Zhuji realm, time couldn't be wasted. Seeing Su Li's action, Jining also sat aside to practice. She didn't dare to go out alone. At this time, in the main tent, beside the rough wooden long table, 11 practitioners with different expressions sat around. Wang Yu sat in the second-to-last position at the end. Glancing at immortal Bingshu, who was sitting in the third position with his eyes closed, a trace of shock and confusion flashed in her eyes. Among the 11 people, except for her and Bingshu, they were all mighty practitioners of Yuanying realm. Why could Bingshu surpass many practitioners of Yuanying realm and sit in the third position? Glancing over the faces of other practitioners, she didn't see any questioning expression, and her heart sank. A superior position and completely unequal intelligence. It seemed that she had underestimated immortal Bingshu from the beginning. Before Wang Yu had time to think about it, the silent elder sitting in the middle of the long table glanced at everyone in the field and slowly said, "It seems that a little friend had an accident and couldn't come. Fortunately, I have made 2 preparations. Time waits for no one. Let's start now." When he said this, although no one showed any different expression, they all listened carefully, which was a response. Seeing this, the elder couldn't help but smile and said gently, "Thanks for your invitation. Since you are here, I think you should have brought the means that I have agreed with you before, right? How can I violate the agreement made with Tian Sanren?" The elder surnamed Yuan, who talked with Wang Yu at the door 2 days ago, laughed and glanced at the other 9 people present with a meaningful look. "There are 6 levels in the ancient cave, and I'm responsible for the 3rd level. I wonder who is the same as me." The information revealed by the elder surnamed Yuan was very clear. There were 6 levels in the ancient cave, and 12 people came. That was to say, there were 2 people responsible for breaking the tactical matrix at each level. Before he finished his words, the old woman in red who brought Dongfang Yi here suddenly spoke. Her hoarse and unpleasant voice made Wang Yu's eardrums hurt. "I'm also responsible for the 3rd level. Do you have any objection, Yuan?" Yuan's face changed slightly, and he smiled again in an instant. He said, "It turns out to be fellow practitioner Poisonous Flower. It's fellow practitioner Tian who arranged to break the tactical matrix. How can I have any objection?" Hearing this, the old woman in red showed a gloomy smile on her wrinkled face. "That's good." Yuan immediately got goosebumps. Without looking at the old woman again, he sat down and stopped talking. But he cursed Tian Sanren in his heart. Why did he put him in the same group with this old monster? With this precedent, the other 5 groups became extremely harmonious after they recognized each other. Anyone with some experience could see that those invited by Tian Sanren were extremely difficult to deal with. Even if they were in Jindan realm, they might be ruthless characters who didn't want to show their strength. No one wanted to offend anyone before they saw the benefits. Seeing that Bingshu and another middle-aged practitioner were in the same group and responsible for the 5th level, Wang Yu's guess was immediately confirmed. Immortal Bingshu really had direct contact with Tian Sanren, but he pretended to know nothing in front of her before. Thinking of this, she was even more afraid of Immortal Bingshu. When everyone stopped talking, Wang Yu came to her senses and found that no one was in the same group with her. She was slightly stunned and looked at the empty chair beside her. Could it be, seeing that everyone has no objection to the grouping, I'm relieved. At this time, Heaven Rover said with a smile. Then he looked at Wang Yu and said apologetically, "Fairy Hong Yu, it seems that the 6th level of the cave can only be broken by you alone. The benefits in the 6th level will naturally be taken by you alone." Wang Yu was a little happy, but she didn't dare to show it on her face. She quickly got up and saluted, saying decisively, "It's all thanks to your care that I can come to participate in the affairs of the cave this time. You can take 30% of the treasures in the 6th level, 30%. The smile on Tian Sanren's face didn't decrease, nor did it increase. No one knew whether he was happy or angry. Wang Yu is a bit smart, Yuan, who was sitting aside, rubbed his chin and thought. He sneered in his heart. But how could a mere 30% tempt the greedy Tian Sanren? The ancient cave was originally discovered by Tian Sanren, so he knew more information about it than anyone else. Although they had a good talk now, no one knew what would happen after they entered it. Since everyone has no objection to the arrangement, then tomorrow morning, please take your men and set off with me to go deep into the Black Stone Forest. Tian Sanren stood up and cupped his hands. Everyone immediately got up and responded. Then the tactical matrix of the main tent was unlocked, and everyone dispersed. Su sensed the change at the first time. She opened her eyes and saw Wang Yu return to the tent with an indifferent expression. "Master, you're finally back." Ji Ning was awakened. She was relieved to see Wang Yu and behaved decently according to Su Li's instructions. Wang Yu's eyes flashed an imperceptible strange color when she heard the words. She smiled softly and said, "Have an early rest. We'll set off tomorrow morning. There are many opportunities in the cave, and even I will benefit. Whether you can go further on the road of cultivation depends on your own performance." Su Li was slightly refreshed. After waiting for so many days, it was finally time to set off. "Yes, Master. I will perform well and won't let you down." Ji Ning straightened up and promised so solemnly that she almost believed it herself. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.